Hey, what's up? It's cute what if this side. Today we will be seeing, what if villain Deku got harem? Now before we move ahead with the fic, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. Nagant's response was immediate. Her right hand came up to her shoulder while her rifle jutted out of her elbow, digging into Izuku's side. Izuku grunted at the impact as Nagant's free hand grabbed his collar, dragging him closer until they were face to face. Where did you get that information? The heroine hissed. Izuku's hand wrapped around her wrist, and although he was breathing heavily, it was obvious the teen wasn't nervous if the dark smile on his face was anything to go by. Careful, he warned, his eyes deliberately flashing towards the row behind them. Nagant followed his gaze and found herself looking at Toga. The woman was casually conversing with the man next to her, but her body betrayed the truth of the situation. Tense, she sat stiffly in her seat, clearly ready to spring into action. It was obvious the woman wanted to leap forward and intervene, but the glint of metal in her hand mere inches from the man's stomach told Nagant that, should anything happen to the greenette, Toga was ready to go through with the threat of simply running wild in the crowd until captured. Nagant grimaced. The revelation that someone, a stranger by all accounts, knew just what it was she did for the commission had driven everything else from her mind. Slowly, one by one, her fingers lifted from Izuku's collar, allowing the boy to lean back, rubbing at the base of his neck. Good, Izuku said calmly. We wouldn't want any accidents to happen now, would we? Shut up, Nagant growled as she tried to rein in her emotions. Just tell me where you got that information. Now, Izuku scolded, wagging his finger in front of the frustrated heroine. That would be telling, and I'm certainly in no mood to share after finding myself at the business end of Lady Nagant's infamous rifle. What, do you want? Nagant hissed through clenched teeth. Izuku grinned. Food. Purple eyes closed then opened again, their confusion obvious. What? You heard me? Izuku smiled. I'm hungry, and you can't expect me to reveal classified government secrets on an empty stomach now. Can you present? Mike just announced an hour's break for lunch, and I'm certainly not going to sit here for that long. You also don't know if you can keep me here without it looking suspicious, Nagant stated, her eyes locked onto Izuku's. Nor can you make sure Toga has enough people around her to deter me from acting, since everyone's going to be leaving their seats. She has to keep herself surrounded by civilians, and you need to stay with me to ensure I don't get any ideas. Yep, Izuku confirmed shamelessly, so let's go get something to eat. Any preferences or allergies I should know about? Nagant's silence was an answer all its own. Great, Izuku said as he rose to his feet where he held out a hand to assist her. Shall we? Nagant didn't respond, merely standing up before striding off, making sure to bump into Izuku as she did so. Well, Izuku murmured, rubbing at his shoulder, a smile still on his face, this should be fun. So saying, the young villain made his way to the end of the row where Nagant stood waiting before the two made their way up through the now mostly deserted stands, Toga already leading the way ahead of them. Eri sat in her seat in front of the windows overlooking the arena as the crowd filed out of the stands. Yagi had left to catch up with an old friend, assuring Eri that he would be back shortly, and if she needed anything, she could simply ask any of the other teachers in the box. A buffet was set against one of the walls, and Eri had gotten herself some food, which she was only now starting to eat. Under overhaul, her meals had tasted bland, only occasionally interrupted by something more exotic when a caretaker wanted to try and get on her good side. Now though, Eri was discovering just how varied food could be, and she was making sure to enjoy it all. As she nibbled on a piece of fried chicken, Eri looked down at the stands, her crimson eyes searching for the dual purple-pink hair of Lady Nagant. It had been a while since she'd last seen the heroine, but when she'd asked Eraserhead, the man had assured her that Nagant made it a point to attend the UA festival for each year. Throughout the festival, whenever her gaze hadn't been fixed on the chaos of the main events, Eri had scanned the crowd, trying to pick the heroine out from a sea of faces and hair colors that reflected just how much the world had changed after the appearance of Quirks. What you looking for, little missy? A modulated voice asked in lightly accented Japanese. Turning, Eri found herself facing the masked cowboy-themed UA. Teacher, Snipe. I'm trying to find Nagant, the horned girl muttered shyly. Snipe recoiled, his surprise obvious. You mean she's here really? Eri nodded. Well, I'd be glad to help you find her, Snipe offered, rubbing the back of his head awkwardly. For some reason, Eri got the sense the man was blushing. Truthfully, I'm a big fan of hers. It's not every day you have someone show up on the scene that just completely outclasses you. Eri blinked before tilting her head to the side to show her confusion. Snipe laughed. I guess that's a bit much for you, isn't it? Let's just say that I am good at what I do, and I've worked hard, trained hard, to get that good. Nagant though, my best is her casual. She can do what I do without even trying, and make it seem effortless. Even if I spent the rest of my life working to improve, she'd probably still be better than me on her worst day. Snipe turned his back to Eri, who was looking up at him with a face filled with awe, her eyes sparkling. Wow, yeah, it is pretty impressive, Snipe agreed as he stepped up to the window, raising an arm above his head as he leaned against it. Now let's see if I can find our missing lady. As Snipe scanned the crowd, Eri ate another piece of chicken, wondering just how long it would take the cowboy to find the heroine. I've got eyes on her, the man said not even a minute later. Where? Eri asked, craning her head as she scanned the dispersing crowd. She's right over there, Snipe pointed as he crouched down next to Eri so he could show her where to look. When Eri's eyes finally found the distant heroine, she gasped. Standing up, she rushed forward to press her face against the window, uncaring as her plate fell to the ground. There was Lady Nagant, and right next to her was a boy with fluffy green hair Eri would recognize anywhere. It was him, her hero. He was here, her hero was here, and he was talking to Nagant. He knew her. Eri smiled widely as she squealed in excitement. If he knew Nagant, then maybe she could talk to him, thank him for saving her. She could meet her hero. Eri, is everything okay? Recollecting herself, Eri turned towards the concerned-looking hero, who'd found her quarry, unable to keep the smile from her face. Yeah, she nodded cheerfully. Everything is just great. Not going to eat anything? Izuku inquired as he bit into a rice, while Nagant's takoyaki sat cooling before her untouched. The sniper didn't respond, merely looking at the greenette. Izuku sighed as he set his rice down before looking at the sniper tiredly. Fine, let's just get this over with. Ask your questions. I promise that I'll answer honestly. Why? Nagant asked suspiciously. Izuku's answer was immediate. Because I want you to trust me. Why? Because I have questions for you as well, and if I'm being honest with you, I'm hoping you'll be transparent with me. Why? Is that the only thing you're got to say? Izuku asked, annoyed, but he raised his hands complacently when Nagant glared at him. Fine, where did you learn about what it is I do? In the compound I've been living in for the last year. Let me try again. Nagant's annoyance was clear. How did you learn about my work for the commission? I could say that I learned about it from my sensei, and leave it at that. Izuku trailed off, but I know that'll do nothing but frustrate you, so I'll give you a full answer. I told you that the reason Toga and I would be considered villains is because we attacked another villainous organization. Well, sensei warned me that such an action would draw attention. He gave me a list of potential investigators and you were amongst them. So you investigated me, Nagant guessed. And you've already proven you're able to find information people would rather not know. What about me gave away what it is I do? Crimson Riot, Izuku said simply. Nagant's shoulders drooped slightly at the name. You were just starting your career when he died, but his death has always been a matter of speculation. Officially, it was reported that he died from private medical issues. Unofficially, he was in the middle of patrol and at the peak of health. There were no reports of villain activity around the route he patrolled, and his hardening quirk meant he would likely have sustained at least some injuries if he died in battle. That doesn't connect him to me, Nagant pointed out. No, it doesn't. Izuku pointed his half-eaten rice at the heroine. What does, however, are sightings of you in the area at the time. You were a new name, so people weren't on the lookout for you like they are now, and most reports concerning you were buried under other hero news. But once you became more well-known, it was quite easy to backtrack and place you in the city at the time of Crimson's death, even if your exact location relative to his couldn't be pinpointed. That still doesn't mean I killed him, Nagant challenged, her voice low so as not to be overheard by the crowds passing by their table. Everything is circumstantial, Izuku admitted, but there's a pattern, especially later in your career. You'll go to a city, but sightings will be covered up by other hero news. Then a hero will die, often connected or blamed on a villain or group. You'll then make yourself known, catch some criminals, save a kitten from a tree, etc. All before moving on for the process to repeat. No evidence, but a lot to think on. Finished, Izuku took another bite while Nagant sat silently, looking down at her untouched takoyaki. Do you mind if I ask a question now? Izuku inquired. I can understand the HPSCs need to control their heroes. They need to keep up the appearance of being the good guys, and anyone that threatens that image has to be dealt with one way or another. What I'm curious about is just why you, Tsutsumi, do what you do. Do you enjoy it like it, or is there some other reason? Despite the noise and bustle around them, silence fell between the two as Izuku waited for Nagant's answer. Why should I tell you? The heroine asked eventually, her voice quiet. You're a villain. That's an excuse and you know it. Nagant was silent and Izuku sighed. You don't have to tell me, he offered, his voice softening, but I'm here. A stranger that in all likelihood you're never going to see again after today. I don't know how many times I wanted someone I could talk to about being quirkless, someone who would just listen. I might be a villain, but you don't have to hide what you've done from me. You can talk about it. Looking up, Nagant found herself pulled once more into Izuku's green eyes. She'd seen a myriad of emotions in those eyes the short time they'd been together: anger, hatred, but also fondness and sadness. Izuku's eyes were old, betraying just what it was he'd been in through. But now looking at those emerald orbs, kinda found herself plagued by the guilt she'd felt ever since she put a bullet in Crimson Riot's back. It had built over the years, with every shot, every kill. Some days kinda couldn't even look at herself in the mirror. She just wanted to just let loose, finally rant, and spill everything she'd hidden away inside. Swallowing, her mouth suddenly dry, kinda at her lips before taking her first bite of her now fairly cool takoyaki. Then after swallowing, the dual-haired heroine opened her mouth once more and began to speak. Please read the second paragraph of the author note for important information. Hey, long time no see, Endeavor. At the sound of that man's voice, the number 2 hero paused halfway down the steps he was on. All might, Endeavor grumbled, turning to look at the man that even now stood above him on the landing. It's been a few years since we last spoke, hasn't it? All Might said with his infamous smile. I saw you, so I thought I'd say hi. Hi, well you've done that, now leave. Turning, Endeavor once more made his way down the stairs, only to be forced to stop as a laughing All Might leapt above him to land in front of the flaming hero. Don't be so cold, the hero joked, although he seemed to realize Endeavor wasn't in the mood for puns at the sneer on the man's face. Get to the point, Endeavor growled. What do you want? Your son, young Todoroki, did wonderful without even using half his power. Is it because you taught him well? Why do you want to know? Why I'm a teacher now, I want to know how best to raise the next generation. And you thought I'd tell you still have that same stupid grin on your face and it's getting on my nerves. Brushing past All Might, Endeavor continued on down the stairs, ignoring the number one's quiet sorry as he did so. To think that the man who stood as an unyielding pillar atop heroic society would apologize for such a minor inconvenience only served to further rouse Endeavor's temper. Just remember this, Endeavor paused, I will make Shoto into a hero that will surpass you one day. It's why he was born. I hope so. What whirling around, Endeavor turned to look at the blonde oaf who seemed to be smiling happily. I hope that young Todoroki will surpass me, as will young Inashi and Kendo and all the other students. To see them grow and blossom into the heroes I know they will become, it makes me happy that I'm able to be their teacher. Words failing him, Endeavor could do little more than snarl like a beast before turning away. For years, he'd done everything he could to surpass that muscular idiot. Yearly, it wasn't All Might that resolved more incidents, it was Endeavor, yet the position of number one didn't change. Endeavor froze. All Might never called him by name, it was always Endeavor. What? This summer, the blonde took a deep breath, I'm planning on formally announcing my retirement from heroics. The stairway underneath the flame hero seemed to fall away. What? He choked out. Surely you've noticed, All Might said, his voice feeling faint to Endeavor's ears. Lately I've been spending less and less time resolving incidents. My public appearances have been dropping. When was the last time I did a formal interview or attended an event? I'm weakening, and if I keep it up, I'm going to burn out. I have to choose what to focus on, and I've decided that my attention should be with my students, ensuring that they reach their full potential. No, Endeavor, I know how hard you've worked. The effort you've put in has not gone unnoticed. I know you're a great hero, so I wanted to be the one to tell you that, come this summer, you will be Japan's new number one hero. Endeavor felt faint on his feet. He grabbed the railing in an effort to remain upright, uncaring of the weakness he was showing. All Might was retiring. He was going to be the next number one hero. The goal he'd held for 2.5 decades since becoming number two at the age of only 23 would finally be completed. Because the man was retiring. Because All Might was hanging up his cape. The metal railing clutched in his hand glowed red as the flames from his hand heated it up to the point of melting. The number one hero. Symbol of peace. Everything he'd ever wanted handed to him on a silver platter. What a joke. The positions were meaningless unless Endeavor surpassed All Might himself, but now he would never get the chance to. Shoto would never get the chance to. Endeavor froze, Shoto would never surpass All Might. None of his children would. Not that Natsuo or Fayumi were pursuing such a career, but Shoto, the one who had, even if he beat All Might's records, carved a name for himself in the history books, it would be against the man's legacy, not the man himself. What was the point then? What was the point of the training? The hours spent in their home dojo, they were meaningless. No, not meaningless. Training had served its purpose. Shoto had honed his quirk into a weapon, and although he would never get a chance to surpass All Might, he would get the chance to surpass another. To surpass him. Endeavor glowered at the thought, but it was true nonetheless. He knew how his son viewed him, how he hated him. His decision to use only his ice was foolish and short-sighted. But it showed the lengths he was willing to go to reach his goals. Like him, letting go of the railing, Endeavor continued on his way while inside his mind, goals that had remained firm for decades shattered and shifted. Shoto would one day become the number one hero, the next All Might, the better one. He would be the hero Endeavor could not, the greatest hero. Endeavor might not have gotten a chance to surpass All Might, but he was the man's successor, and his son would make his mark by succeeding him. There was a lot that had to be done, but the next step remained the same: getting the boy to accept and use his fire. Welcome back everybody. Now that the lunch break is over, it's time to reveal the last game of the first year festival. Sorry for those of you that didn't make it to the finals, but don't worry, before that starts, there are recreational games that you can participate in. We've even brought cheerleaders from America to liven things up. And oh, what's this? Mike leaned forward to get a better view while Aizawa groaned, his head dropping down on the table. What are they doing? Oi, Class A and B, what's with this fan service standing on the field? Their faces obscured by shadows. The female members of the two heroic classes stood in the same cheerleading outfits worn by the foreigners. Mina Kaminari, you tricked us, didn't you? Momo yelled, waving a pom-pom furiously at the two perverts who were grinning with their co-conspirator, 1B's Suburaba. To think that I would be tricked into putting on an outfit for such a sinful reason. Ibara muttered, burying her head in her hands while the more diminutive Komori hid behind her bashfully. Oh come on girls, enjoy it. Tokage grinned, highlighting her mouth full of sharp teeth. We've got some time before the finals actually start, and it'd be a pain if things got tense, so let's just do it. But these outfits are so revealing, Kyoka complained with a blush. Just consider it practice for the future. Tokage shrugged. See, ponies getting into it. Indeed, the horned blonde of 1B was jumping around yelling in her native English, although she was quickly joined by what appeared to be a set of floating clothes. Hagakure, Momo yelled, scandalized. You like this? Hatorichan the froggy Tsuyu commented. Now, for the final round, our 17 finalists who have pushed themselves plus Ultra will be duking it out one-on-one tournament style. The bracket was randomly assigned, and for those of you wondering about how this will work with an odd number of participants, every round one student will be randomly selected to have a bye with the last round's bye, replacing the new one in the tournament. That means you gotta be careful because the opponent you were planning to fight against might be switched out, flipping all your plans on their head. For our first round, the bye will be awarded to the student that has dominated the festival so far, Urashi. Now without further ado, let's reveal the competition. Katsuki Bakugo vs Nido Monoma. Ijiro Kirishima vs Mei Hatsume. Juzo Honuki vs Shoto Todoroki. Itsuka Kendo vs Mizo Shoji. Hitoshi Shinso vs Fumikage Tokoyami. Mina Ashido vs Tenya Ida. Achako Uraraka vs Setsuna Tokage. Yui Kodai vs Momo Yairazu. Bayanasa Urashi. Finalists, you guys are welcome to participate in the recreational games. Although resting or saving your strength is fine too. Basically, you're free to do whatever you want until the finals, so make sure to put on a good show for us. The sound of trumpets blared through the stadium speakers as the crowd roared loud enough to nearly drown them out. President Mike spoke once more, his voice unusually serious. At the beginning of today's festivities, there were over 200 UA first-year students hoping to show the world what it is they were capable of. After 2 events, that number has been reduced to a mere 17. The field's been prepared, our competitors are awaiting their chance to once more step into the spotlight. That's right, the finals you've all been waiting for are finally starting. President Mike was forced to pause due to the sheer volume coming from the crowd. Joining Midnight as backup referee and field coordinator, we have UAS very own Cementos. The billboards flash to a picture of the hero sitting on a makeshift cement throne. Now to start us off, match number 1. He's got a fiery temper matched only by his explosive quirk. From the hero course, 1AS Katsuki Bakugo vs. the teen who wants to show that just because he's in class 1B doesn't mean he's in second place. From the hero course, Nido Monoma. Force your opponent out of bounds, immobilize them, or get them to admit defeat and you win. As the two boys walked onto the field, Izuku couldn't help leaning forward. Getting the chance to see quirks in use was always something he loved, and to get a front row seat to witness those of the best hero hopefuls from across Japan was a dream come true. He was of course rooting for Momo's triumphant win, but he was proud of her no matter how she performed. He couldn't help but wonder just how much of her ability she was going to display here and how much she would keep hidden for the future. Either way, her opponents were in for a tough fight. As for Bakugo, Izuku just hoped that the boy was eliminated quickly, although he couldn't help but feel it would have to be one of the more powerful students if they hoped to have any chance of doing so. Standing in the middle of the ring, the two blondes faced each other, one sporting an arrogant smirk, the other an expression of indifferent annoyance. "Hey," Monoma called out, rubbing the back of his head. "What was it you said again during that thing you called a speech I pledged to win?" he snorted, shaking his head. "Aren't you embarrassed? I mean, you made such a big promise and you certainly haven't been living up to your words. You got, what, 7th in the first round, 4th in the second, you haven't even made it in the top 3 and you claim you're going to win. Don't make me laugh." "Ready." "Oi," Bakugo muttered, his cold voice contrasting sharply against the berserker-like expression of rage he was sporting. "Shut up before I kill you." "Kill me," Monoma blinked. "That's certainly not something a hero should say." "Start." Bakugo let out a maddened roar as he launched himself forward, propelled by his explosions. Bringing his right arm back, the explosive blonde let loose with a massive explosion, intending to send Monoma flying out of the ring and straight into a hospital bed. The last thing Bakugo saw before the smoke produced by his explosion enshrouded the two competitors was Monoma bringing up his left arm defensively, a victorious smile on his face. "I win." The smoke slowly began to clear, revealing Bakugo's right arm locked against Monoma's left. The 1B blonde was sporting a smug grin, although said smile appeared almost predatory in nature, largely due to the green scales that now covered the left side of his face and neck, disappearing beneath his gym uniform only to re-emerge on Monoma's left arm, giving the formerly ordinary limb a rather draconian appearance. Just as sparks began to erupt from Bakugo's hand, Monoma's scales twitched, giving Bakugo mere moments to redirect his explosion, using it to assist his retreat instead of attacking with it like he initially intended. This proved to be a wise decision as Monoma's scales erupted from his body, cutting through the space where Bakugo had just been. Bakugo growled as the scales changed direction midair, honing in on him. Leaping to the side, Bakugo dodged once more, but when they came around for another attack, Bakugo instead let loose with an explosion. The force of the attack caused the majority of the scales to crack or break apart entirely, leaving only a few survivors that were immediately destroyed by Bakugo's follow-up attack. As the last of the scales fell lifelessly to the ground, Bakugo turned his attention back to Monoma, who was standing there still sporting that smug grin of his. "You know, when I saw you giving that poor excuse for a student pledge, I thought I recognized you from somewhere, so I did some research over the break. You were the victim of the Misutafu slime incident, weren't you?" Bakugo froze. "You sure talk big for someone who needed saving from a villain, saying you're going to win and beat all of us. Don't make me laugh." Veins began to throb on Bakugo's neck as the blonde clenched his teeth. "Oi, your scales broke." Monoma edged his head to the side. "So Your scales might be able to resist an explosion or two, but I can break them. Explosions erupted behind Bakugo as he propelled himself forward once more, so that means all I have to do is keep attacking. Geez, he figured it out, Monoma shrugged, remarkably unconcerned with the explosive hero wannabe charging his way. The 1B blonde sighed, exhaling mist despite the beautiful and warm spring weather, or not, he finished slamming his right foot into the ground. From Monoma's foot, ice raced across the ground before rushing upwards towards a shocked Bakugo who tried to twist himself midair to avoid the ice, but found his reaction this time to be all too slow. Ice surrounded the bomber, freezing him in place but leaving his head exposed before continuing its upwards climb, leaving frozen peaks that stretched towards the sky and first few rows of the stands. Monoma shivered slightly, the right side of his body dotted with a light layering of frost. What's this? For a moment it looked like Bakugo had him on the ropes, but in an instant, Monoma has turned this battle around using not one, but two quirks. Present Mike yelled his announcement, expressing the confusion that encapsulated the majority of the audience. No, Bakugo's voice was low but both Monoma and the referees heard it all the same. This ice is half and halves, you're a copier aren't you? Raising a hand to his head, Monoma swept back his hair as he smiled, that's right. Nito Monoma, quirk copy. He can use the quirks of anyone he touches for 5 minutes. He can't use two at the same time though. Bakugo, are you able to move? Midnight questioned. Good, Bakugo smiled, ignoring the teacher's probing question. We've been at UA for a month now and not once has half and half used his fire. Not in rescue training, heroic exercise, or even combat drills. It's always that damn ice of his and he still stays near the top of the class. But you can copy his quirk. Yeah, I passed by Todoroki as I was making my way here, so of course I made sure to accidentally bump into him. The ice around Bakugo groaned and cracked as it seemed to settle, but that didn't detract from the boy's wide eager grin. So you can use his fire, as if in response, Monoma's right side combusted, the fire melting the ice that had dotted his left side. Up in the 1A student section, Todoroki's grip tightened on his armrests. Bakugo, if you don't respond I'll call the match, Midnight warned. That means even if Icy Hot won't go all out. Bakugo leaned forward eagerly, you will. The sound of explosions echoed through the stadium, enhanced by the ice enshrouding Bakugo, ice that exploded outward as Bakugo activated his quirk. Damn it, he just won't quit, Monoma cursed. Time was running out for the 1B blonde, he could only use a quirk for so long, and while he'd been able to copy his classmate's Scale's quirk right before walking out onto the field, he'd bumped into Todoroki even earlier. He could already feel the quirk beginning to fade away. I need to end this right now. Calling on half cold half hot, Monoma planted his right foot, sending another wave of ice at Bakugo who propelled himself into the air to avoid it. Monoma's right side burst into flames once more as he tried to direct the ice at the charging Bakugo, whose abrupt directional changes due to midair explosions made it hard to be accurate, particularly with an unfamiliar quirk. Come on, Bakugo cried out as he began to turn in midair. Show me just how much half and half's been holding back. Geez, Monoma's smile remained even as he drew on the full power of Todoroki's quirk. Although this time the grin seemed far more real. For someone with such a barbaric personality, he really does motivate you to go at him with everything you've got. Thrusting his arms forward, Monoma released everything he had while Bakugo's spinning came to an end, the blonde releasing the largest explosion he could. The two opposing forces met and a massive explosion enshrouded the stage, obscuring the two competitors in smoke. Air rushed into the stands forcing the majority of the onlookers to obscure their faces and brace themselves in their seats. Wow, Eri said dumbfoundedly as she pressed her tiny hands against the window while Toshinori looked on with a smile. When the smoke cleared, only one blonde had remained on the field, panting with exertion, but still upright. The other lay in a crumpled heap several meters away from the platform. With the F of her whip, Midnight called the match. Nito Monoma is out of bounds. Katsuki Bakugo advances to the second round. And with an explosive finish, the winner of the first match is Katsuki Bakugo. Present Mike yelled out as the stadium erupted into cheers for the short but dramatic match. Said winner walked off the field without a word, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway while some UA robots picked up Monoma on a stretcher to take to Recovery Girl. Man, what an exciting way to start off the finals, but what was the deal with that massive explosion at the end? Mike questioned. Bakugo used his explosions to increase his rotation speed and momentum, allowing him to create a larger than normal blast. Eraserhead answered bluntly. The air had already been cooled earlier thanks to Monoma's ice attack, but when combined with both his fire and Bakugo's explosions, the rapid heating of the air caused it to expand. And that's science for you, Mike cheered. Now that Cementos has cleared the field, let's meet our competitors for the second match. He's a redhead hardhead with a quirk to match. From Hero Course Class 1A, Ijiro Kirishima. Cheers echoed throughout the stadium as Kirishima walked onto the field, waving his hands above his head. Against him we have the only student from the support course to make it to the finals. 1H's Mei Hatsume. The yells this time were quieter but still there nonetheless as a girl with pink dreadlocks and some kind of goggles over her eyes made her way onto the field absolutely loaded down with support items. Let's start the second match. Kirishima didn't waste any time hardening his hands. He smashed them together before charging at the steampunk goggle-wearing inventor. Sorry, but I won't go easy on you. It would be unmanly. Hatsume merely smiled, lowering a microphone beside her mouth before drawing a gun-like device that she fired at Kirishima. The redhead's forward charge promptly came to an end as he fell forward wrapped up in a net. A capture gun to use against villains. Each net comes preloaded in a cartridge and you can fire up to 5 before needing to reload. Hatsume's voice echoed throughout the stadium. A mic Y present mic questioned. She couldn't have hacked into the system, so she must be wearing speakers. Aizawa summarized, the two announcers' voices not reaching the crowd having switched off their own microphones. Turning her back towards Kirishima to face the stands, Hatsume spread her arms wide as she looked upwards towards the boxes. Where are the support companies sitting? The Pinkette scanned until she found some official-looking people in suits muttering to one another, VIP lanyards around their necks. They're in there biting, I've got them hooked. May Hatsume. Quark zoom. She can clearly see up to 5 kilometers away. Damn it, Kirishima growled as he used the sharp, hardened edge of his body to finally cut away the net that held him. His face was red more from embarrassment than anything else. Charging at Hatsume, Kirishima moved to grab the girl whose backpack beeped before extending a metal pole that both moved Hatsume out of the way, and had the added effect of tripping the hardening student, sending him to the ground once more. Even when my back is turned, I can easily evade attacks thanks to my hydraulic attachments. With sensors facing every direction, no one will be able to get the drop on you, making ambushes and surprise attacks a thing of the past. Who invented these items, you ask? It was none other than me. May Hatsume. Everyone from support companies. It's clear who your choice should be. May Hatsume. May Hatsume. May Hatsume. What is she, a politician? Worse, Aizawa groaned, burying his head in his arms, a door-to-door salesman. And now I'll demonstrate my next item. There's more was the synchronous thought of everyone watching. 10 minutes later, Hatsume finally stepped off the platform, wiping her forehead with satisfaction. I've presented each and every last one of my babies. I have nothing more to say. Hatsume is out of bounds. Kirishima advances to the second round. Said Victor lay on his hands and knees in the center of the field with a defeated look on his face. Is he okay, Kiro? Tsuyu croaked with her classic head tilt. Kiri's fine. Mina assured her froggy classmate, probably. She looked back at the boy, who normally wore his emotions on his sleeves, maybe. Kirishima's soul seemed to vacate his body, heading towards the heavens with a look of enlightenment on its face. Or maybe I should go check on him, the Pinkette said, rising to her feet. Boy, Aizawa, wake up. The match is over. Finally, the black-haired heroic hobo said, sitting up. Remind me to have Nezu limit the number of items a support student can bring to the festival and to make a rule against presentations. Wanna bet that Majima's the most embarrassed right now? Present Mike grinned. No. Geez, would it kill you to join in on the betting just once? Yes, come on. Oi Kiri, you alright? Mina asked as she finally came across the forlorn-looking boy slowly dredging his way back towards the 1A student section. Mina the redhead questioned, raising his head, already looking livelier than he had after his match. What are you doing here? Looking for you, of course. Mina grinned. What, did you think I was just gonna leave my horn buddy all alone after, well, that? Kirishima groaned. Please don't bring that up. Fine, Mina agreed, putting her hands behind her head as she walked alongside her friend. But I don't get what the big idea is. It wasn't that bad. That bad I looked like an idiot. Hatsume was in control that entire match. Everything I did just helped her and her support items look better. The only reason I won at all was because she decided to walk off the field. She could have won whenever she wanted. She should be moving on. But she's not, you are. Mina pointed out. You, Kiri, are moving on to the second round of the UA Sports Festival. So what if your first match was embarrassing? You already showed what you can do in the first 2 events, and you have another match that you can stand out in. You're up against Bakugo, and I bet that you'll be able to stand up to his explosions a lot better than some weak scales can. Yeah, you're right. Mina smiled as Kirishima's face broke out into a sharp-toothed, yet timid grin. Hey Kiri, remember what you told me on our first day here at UA? I'm saying goodbye to the pathetic me. I won't regret anything anymore. That's what you said. Yeah, I remember. Man, it feels like that was forever ago, doesn't it? No, what you said back then, I could tell you were speaking straight from your heart. Kiri, you've changed. I know that you regret not getting involved that day with the villain. That you regret freezing, but Kiri, you're no longer the same scared kid you were back then. You're here with me training to be heroes. You said you weren't going to have any more regrets, so don't have them now. Focus on your next match, on the future, and charge towards it with everything you've got. Yeah, Kirishima screamed, activating his quirk. I'm all fired up now. So what if I didn't make a good first impression? That just means I have to try harder. That's the spirit, Mina encouraged, patting Kirishima on the back. Happy, confident Kiri was much better than sad, downtrodden Kiri, and she'd fight anyone who said otherwise. Now let's get back to our seats. As if on cue, the ground beneath them rumbled and shook. What's happening? Mina questioned. I don't know, but hold on. As quickly as the rumbling began, it stopped. What was that? Mina groaned, stumbling, still a little shaken up. Kiri didn't answer, instead raising a finger to point dumbly at a television hanging from the ceiling in the center of the hallway displaying the sports festival, his mouth agape. Mina followed his finger and couldn't help but curse at the image on screen. Holy. Aizawa, what are you teaching your kids? This isn't my doing. This is the sheer power Todoroki possesses. The product of the son of the number 2 hero, a massive glacier, completely encapsulated the half of the arena formerly occupied by Todoroki's opponent, Class 1B's Juzo Honuki. The glacier towered over the stadium, surpassing and even piercing beyond its roof, making it visible to those outside the arena. Todoroki's quirk might have been copied by Monoma, who'd used a similar attack in an attempt to encapsulate Bakugo, but in a single move, Todoroki had demonstrated that it was indeed he who was the master of his quirk. Her right side covered in ice, Midnight opened her mouth. Shivering, the heroine prepared to stutteringly call the match when Honuki's voice cut her off. Really, you're still using your ice against me? We've already proven that doesn't work. You're going to need to do something else if you want to beat me. Todoroki's already cold gaze hardened even further as the massive glacier began to soften and turned to slush, from which a relatively unscathed, if cold and wet, Honuki stepped out. Nothing to say, Monoma's already shown that you can use fire, and with how much frost coverage you have on your right side, I'm gonna guess you're going to need it. No, I don't need that power. No, the skull-faced boy blinked in surprise, although it was clear he was getting angry. Why won't you use it? You're only hurting your own chances. You went all out with your ice right at the start, and yet here I am. Do you want to lose? I'd rather not win because my opponent threw the match, but I will if I have to. I don't need my fire to beat you. Yes, you do. Honuki shook his head. Fine, whatever. Don't use it. Honuki began to run forward, but don't blame me when your stubbornness costs you the match. Once more Todoroki sent out a wave of ice, actively starting to shiver as the frost already on him spread even further. The move proved useless though, as with a simple touch, Honuki once more turned the ice to slush. Todoroki backpedaled, sending out another wave of ice that was dealt with just as easily. The dual-haired boy moved to retreat but found he couldn't. With an unrelenting forward charge, Honuki has backed Todoroki up against the edge of the arena. Will he pull off the upset and defeat Todoroki? I'm going to lose, Todoroki realized with a start as Honuki reached forward, his hand outstretched. Just before the living lick could make contact, fire raced along Todoroki's left arm. What am I doing? Todoroki questioned, staring at his arm in shock. Still, the fire made Honuki leap backwards, and even though he was distracted, Todoroki's training pushed him to take advantage of the opening. Just as it was intended to do, even though its appearance was brief, the flames still melted away Todoroki's frosty covering, allowing the boy to send out another wave of ice. I told you that wouldn't work, Honuki screamed, but Todoroki had learned from his mistake. He didn't intend to entrap his opponent, something Honuki realized as, rather than surrounding him, the ice rushed forward to meet him. The ice turned to slush at his touch, but it kept coming, pushing him backwards. And with Todoroki already on the edge of the arena, it didn't take much for the force of the slushy ice mixture to push Honuki to the side of the arena and over it. Juzo Honuki is out of bounds. Todoroki advances to the second round. As the crowd erupted into cheers and Honuki pulled himself to his waterlogged feet, Todoroki turned, walking back to the hallway he'd entered the arena through. Lost in thought as he gazed down at his left hand, Todoroki almost bumped into the next competitor making their way to the arena. Hey Todoroki, I watched your fight from the waiting room. Nice job. Todoroki didn't respond, merely looking at Kendo blankly before continuing silently on his way. Itsuka sighed as she continued her walk to the arena. Todoroki might have declared war, but that didn't mean she couldn't appreciate his out-of-the-box thinking when it came to fighting an opponent he was ill-matched with. Standing in the entryway leading onto the field, Kendo watched Cementos use his quirk to move the icy slush to the stadium's edge before flattening the arena over once more. Sorry for the delay, folks, but we're back and ready for another flashy battle. She's a carrot-headed kung fu master of martial arts, Hero Course 1A's vice representative, Itsuka Kendo on the other side. What secrets hide behind that mask of his only he himself knows from the Hero Course. It's Mizo Shoji. The crowd cheered as the fighters made their way onto the field and took their spots. Ready, go. At present, Mike's yell, the two rushed forward. When they were close enough, Shoji lashed out, taking advantage of the extended reach his quirk granted him. Itsuka dodged and closed in, activating her own quirk. She threw an enlarged punch at the boys. Shoji grunted at the impact but wrapped his arms around Itsuka's enlarged hand, trapping it. Itsuka shrunk her fist in an effort to free herself, but Shoji only tightened his grip, not even reacting when the Orangeette kicked at his knee. The masked boy retreated, dragging Itsuka with him towards the edge of the arena. Kendo enlarged her free hand, but off balance, her punches lacked the strength they normally had, allowing Shoji to shrug them off better than he usually would. Seeing the line that marked out of bounds approaching, Itsuka felt her feet leave the ground as Shoji turned, trying to throw her over it and end the match. Whereas before Itsuka had tried to free herself from Shoji's grasp, she now found herself desperately trying to hold on to him, managing to just grasp his PE uniform. Drawing on her martial arts training, Itsuka twisted in midair to plant her feet on the ground inches from the white line that marked the difference between victory and defeat. Using her grip on Shoji, Itsuka pulled with all her might, trying to lift the larger boy over her shoulder and throw him. Seeing what she was trying to do, Shoji wrapped his arms around Itsuka's hand, locking the two in a desperate battle for physical supremacy. Itsuka trying to throw Shoji over her shoulder while he tried to forcibly push her the last few inches needed for her to cross the out-of-bound line. Itsuka tried to activate her quirk, but Shoji's arms were so tightly wound around hers that the moment her hands started to expand, the bones in her wrist were forced against one another, sending pain coursing through her body. That brief moment of weakness granted Shoji the upper hand, and he ever so slowly began to make headway, forcing Itsuka back. Itsuka tried to re-establish herself, but now that he had the advantage, Shoji wasn't letting up. Just as her toes began to scrape against the edge line, Itsuka reached within herself, calling upon one for all. As the power of the quirk flowed through her, Itsuka planted her feet in the ground and drew upon her original quirk, Big Fist. However, it wasn't her hands that expanded to her surprise, it was her feet as her trotters grew. Her shoes split apart, but curling her toes, Itsuka managed to fix herself in place as she literally towed the line. Shoji's forward rush ground to a halt, and having just exerted himself, the tides turned now to Itsuka's favor. Itsuka groaned, her feet shrinking, and Shoji's eyes widened as the tentaclarmed boy slowly felt his own feet begin to leave the ground while his arms wrapped tightly around Itsuka's hands started being forced apart. With a wordless shout of pure determination, Kendo's hands enlarged past Shoji's ability to hold them. With the increased strength her hands granted her, Itsuka gave one last almighty heave, hauling Shoji over her shoulder before slamming him onto his back across the line. Mizo Shoji is out of bounds. Itsuka Kendo wins. Midnight declared with a whip crack. The crowd cheered as Itsuka helped Shoji to his feet before together they exited the arena. Thanks for a good battle, Shoji offered sportingly. I was shocked when you managed to overcome my grip strength. So was I, Kendo answered truthfully. It hurt to even try growing my hands when you had a hold of them, but we're here to push beyond our limits, so I just tried to do the best I could. Trust me, it was as much a surprise to me as it was for you. Speaking of surprises, what was the deal with your feet? I thought you could only increase the size of your hands. Itsuka was silent for a moment. So did I, she mumbled quietly, looking down towards her bare feet. So did I. There's no halftime here, we're hopping straight into match number 5. He's the general studies sole survivor that made it to the finals. What has he done to stand out again? It's 1 degree Celsius' very own Hitoshi Shinso versus. He's a lone samurai accompanied by a shadow of darkness from the hero course. It's Fumikage Tokoyami. The crowd cheered as the two competitors stood facing one another. Tokoyami stood silently, arms crossed in front of his while Shinso rubbed the back of his head with one hand, seemingly bored. Samurai Shadow of Darkness, what are you, a Chunibyo? Ready? Tokoyami didn't respond and Shinso's bored appearance morphed into one of cold focus. What, too afraid to talk? Start. Dark Shadow heeding its master's call. Dark Shadow emerged from Tokoyami, rushing towards an unprepared Shinso. The purple-headed general studies student quickly dove to the side, causing Dark Shadow to fly by. Shit, you call that thing a heroic quirk? What kind of hero relies on darkness? Forget training to be a hero, you should be a villain. Oi, Tokoyami yelled before freezing in place. Shinso smiled. I win. Climbing back to his feet, Shinso opened his mouth preparing to command Tokoyami to walk out of bounds, when something suddenly grabbed his shoulders and began pushing him across the ground. What Shinso turned his head to meet the yellow-eyed gaze of a living shadow, and as his eyes widened in recognition, the shadowy spirit loosened its grip, releasing the shocked boy before returning to its brainwashed master. Mouth open, Shinso moved to speak when the crack of a whip caught his attention. Hitoshi Shinso! Midnight yelled out. Turning, Shinso found himself looking down the length of the heroine's whip. Out of bounds, Fumikage Tokoyami advances to the second round. What, looking down, Shinso found that he indeed did have 1 foot over the line. Hands that had hung loosely tightened into fists. Damn it. Looking up, Shinso watched Dark Shadow fly around Tokoyami, studying him curiously. I focused too much on Tokoyami when I should have gone after his quirk. Shinso blinked. Can I even brainwash quirks? Why, Midnight, what's up with Tokoyami? Present Mike's yell got the attention of the majority of the stadium, many of whom were indeed eyeing the frozen bird-headed boy standing dumbly in the middle of the field. He's brainwashed. Eraserhead cut in flatly. Shinso stilled as murmuring broke out across the stadium. Hitoshi Shinso. Quirk brainwashing. Responding to him turns on a brainwashing switch in his opponent's brain and forces them to do what he says. If he doesn't want the switch to turn on, it won't. Sighing, Shinso flipped the switch, releasing Tokoyami from his control before making his way towards the exit. That was my chance to stand out and I blew it. Monoma copied my quirk last round to help us keep the hill we took and he wanted to use it in his match, but he accepted my refusal since I wanted to show what I could do. Maybe I really am not cut out for heroics. Shinso. How blinking, Shinso looked up above the exit gate where several students in UA.PE uniforms stood smiling and waving. My classmates. You were really cool, Shinso. You made it to the finals, nice job showing them what general studies can do. Besides, are you hearing what the heroes are saying about you? Heroes. A brainwashing quirk. Those are always really useful when dealing with villains. I wish I had it. A lizardman-looking hero with a skull mask complained sullenly. UA's not very smart if he's in general studies. A hero Shinso recognized as Ms. Joke commented. Well, they've got a ton of applicants, some things just can't be helped. Another added. Still, what a waste. Hear that, Shinso, you're amazing. Everyone thinks so. They think I'm amazing. Shinso's fist, which had been hanging low, curled into fists. They believe in me when I don't even believe in myself. What a joke. So what if I had a poor performance this time? I've come this far. I'm not going to give up now. Eventually I'll get into the hero course, get certified, and one day I'll be a pro hero with a newfound determination. Shinso exited the stadium, his goals just moments before on the verge of dying rekindled and burning with passion. Match number 6. She's a lean pink acid spraying machine from the hero course. 1AS Mina Ashido vs. He's a member of the legendary Ida family renowned for their powerful engines. Speeding into action from the hero course, Tenya Ida of Class 1A. Ashidasan, just because we are friends, do not expect me to hold back against you. I'd be disappointed if you did, Adakun. But don't think you're going to win that easily. Ada's glasses flashed in the light as he adjusted them. I wouldn't dare to. That's why I'll be going all out from the very start. Mina smiled, then I'll do the same. Our quirks might not be the flashiest, but let's give them a show. Ada returned her grin with his own. Sounds good to me. The two turned to look at Midnight, who was hugging herself while squealing. Such a youthful display of vigor and passion. I'm getting all hot and bothered. Should she really be saying that? The two students' sweat dropped. Ready, Ada crouched down in a runner's starting position while Mina stretched out her hands, laying one atop the other so her palms were touching. Start. Recipro burst. Acid stream. Engines roaring, Ada raced across the field towards Mina, intending to grab the pinkette and push her out of bounds. The sheer speed Ada possessed when he used Recirpo Burst made it almost impossible for anyone to effectively counter him. However, as Ada had come to learn over the short time he'd known her, Mina Ashido was not just anybody. As Ada charged forward using his family's super move, Mina sprayed acid on the ground in front of her, using the position of her hands to both widen the spray and increase its pressure. Ada was used to running on hard ground, and he had rarely if ever run on wet surfaces using his quirk. With the boosted speed provided by Recipro Burst, control was a lost cause. Hitting Mina's acid trap, Ada lost his balance, tumbling head over heels, his speed enough to carry him over the line where he lay stunned and disoriented. Tenya Ada is out of bounds, Mina Ashido advances. And it's over in mere seconds. We have our winner. Mina Ashido advances to round 2. Poor Ada, that has to be embarrassing. Kendo muttered, a hand on her head. What do you think? Yeah, Momo. Sorry, the raven-haired girl apologized with a wave of her hand and a blush. I was distracted trying to mentally prepare for my own match. What was the question? I was just asking what your thoughts were on the match. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your preparations. It's fine, I was already done mostly. Just some last-minute review of materials I think might be useful. As for the match, well, I'd say it's an upset. Yeah, I'll say. No offense to Mina, but I thought Ada was sure to win. I doubt she'd be offended. The relationship those two have developed is most surprising, especially considering the vast contrast in their personalities. I'll say, I thought they'd be all over each other, but I think it's rare to see them even disagree. Momo hummed in consideration. I see your point. Speaking of surprises, what was with your sudden ability to increase the size of other body parts? I don't know, Itsuka complained, grabbing her head in her hands. I went to see Recovery Girl about it, but she said she can't do anything about it at the moment due to the festival, and the earliest she can look into it is next week, since she still has to deal with the second and third year festivals over the next 2 days. I'd ask a teacher, but they're all occupied, and I doubt Ozawa would be happy being interrupted since he's an announcer. Momo giggled at the air quotes Itsuka put around the word, which brought a small smile to the orange-haired martial artist's face. Well, I don't know if I can officially diagnose you, but I would be more than happy to assist you in training if you need it. Thanks, Momo, I appreciate it, Itsuka said, genuinely thankful for her friend's offer. We've got no time to lose. Let's move on to match number 7 from Hero Course Class 1A. The girl who sets your hopes and expectations afloat. Achako Uraraka vs. She's a fanged reminder of prehistoric times and one of UA's 4 recommendation students, Class 1B's Setsuna Tokage. Standing on stage, Uraraka's eyes furrowed in concentration, a sharp contrast to her opponent who was standing tall and waving at the crowd with a sharp-toothed grin, only stopping to waggle her eyebrows in Uraraka's direction. Start. Ducking low, Uraraka rushed forward, her hands outstretched to either side ready to react the moment Tokage tried to do something. However, the green-haired girl merely stood there confidently. Why isn't she reacting? Uraraka wondered as she closed in. Does she have a plan? Should I change my approach? No. The brunette shook her head. I can't doubt myself. Not here and not now. Reaching out, Uraraka's eyes widened as her hand touched Setsuna's uniform and her quirk activated, setting the green-haired girl afloat. Setsuna still didn't move, and though every instinct was screaming at her that this was a trap, Uraraka couldn't let the sheer opportunity presented to her pass by. Grabbing a hold of Tokage's uniform, Uraraka rushed towards the edge of the arena, dragging the floating girl behind her like an abnormally shaped dune. I'm doing it, I'm going to win, mommy, daddy, are you watching me? Caught up in her seemingly assured victory, Uraraka almost missed Tokage's whispered words, go men. Sorry, but I'm going to start trying now. Huh. Just as Uraraka shoved Tokage's floating body towards the out-of-bounds line, the girl's body split apart, rushing past Uraraka. Whirling, Uraraka could only look on in shock as Tokage's body floated in the air behind her despite being divided up into dozens of pieces. What? Tokage smiled pityingly. Don't worry, I gave you a chance to show the crowd what you can do. You made it to the finals, so odds are you'll get an offer of some kind. As for our match, don't be too hard on yourself. You just had bad luck being matched with someone whose quirk countered your own. The match isn't over yet, Uraraka cried as she rushed towards where Tokage floated. The green just kept smiling sadly. Yes, it is. At a mental command, the pieces of her body rushed at Uraraka, who braced herself, doing her best to shield her face against the onslaught. She tried to lash out with her hand, desperate to grab at least one part of Tokage's body, but they were moving too fast. Combined with the nausea she was feeling from having kept her quirk active for so long, all it took was a particularly large chunk of Tokage's body slamming into the unprotected back of her head with sufficient force to knock Uraraka to the ground. Her vision fading to black, even as she desperately tried to struggle onward. Seeing the brunette collapse, Tokage gathered her pieces back together and reformed herself. She stood looking on neutrally as Midnight stepped onto the field to check on Uraraka. Uraraka's unable to continue. Setsuna Tokage advances to the second round at Midnight's announcement. Tokage just turned around and made her way off the field. As robots wheeled Uraraka away, Midnight couldn't help but look on sympathetically. As much as she loved seeing someone's hopes get raised only to be destroyed at the last second, it was always tough seeing it happen to one of her students. She might not be that close with them, but seeing them in action always reminded her of her own school days. Back as a younger Kayama, when her costume was little more than a set of underwear with a trench coat and a utility belt, before the HPSC decided that such revealing attire should be discouraged unless it was essential for quirk use, or was impractical for the individual. Even now, it made her scoff. How could such attire be setting a bad example for impressionable minds? It was her decision to share the goods that the gods had given her. Besides, the reactions of Yamada and Aizawa when they were her sweet little kuhai was just the best. She really should make fun of them for that again when she had a chance. Shaking her head to clear the somewhat dirty thoughts from her mind, Midnight made her way back to her spot as the final two competitors made their way onto the field. It's finally time for the eighth and final match of round one. She's cool as a cuber and living proof that silence can be deadly. From the hero course, Yui Kodai vs. All-Purpose Creation. She's the class representative of 1A and entered UA through recommendation, meaning her abilities are pro-hero certified. Also from the hero course, Momo Yaoyorozu. Ready, start. Activating her quirk, Momo's arms glowed as the Ravenet created her first two items: a metal bow staff from her left hand for offense, and a shield wrapped around her right arm for defense. Momo completed her weapons just as Kodai reached her, the blank-faced girl dodging Momo's swing of her staff, thrusting out her hand in retaliation. Momo moved her shield to intercept the strike, and to her shock, when Kodai's hand met the shield, the easily portable metal rapidly expanded, turning from a bucklerish shield into one more reminiscent of a pavise. The sudden increase in weight shifted Momo's center of gravity, throwing the Yaoyorozu heiress off balance. As the massive metal pulled her towards the ground, Momo swung her staff, more to ward off Kodai than with any actual intent to make contact. Kodai indeed retreated backwards, but only so she could put her fingers together, similar to Uraraka when she was releasing her quirk. Kodai's quirk seemed to work on the same principles. The moment her fingers met, Momo's shield shrunk back down to its normal size. Off balance, Momo barely managed to turn her fall into an awkward stumble. As soon as she released her quirk, Kodai rushed in once more, and as she stumbled, Yaoyorozu swung her staff horizontally at her approaching foe. Kodai ducked under the attack before grasping Momo's uniform with her hands. Using Momo's temporary instability, Kodai began to force Momo towards the ring's edge, simultaneously activating her quirk on Momo's uniform, shrinking the garment until it clung tightly to her body and constricted her movements. Initially, Momo struggled, trying to move in the restricting uniform, but she quickly changed her strategy as the dreaded line approached. Letting go of her bow staff, Momo created several blades which thrust out from her body, forcing Kodai back to avoid being stabbed as the blades sliced through Momo's uniform, creating several tears in the primarily blue fabric. With some breathing room and Kodai not showing any sign of rushing in, Momo cut off her quirk, letting the half-formed blades fall off her body to the ground in their current incomplete state. Eyeing Kodai in case she tried something, Momo reached out and undid the strap on her shield that was still buckled to her right arm, letting it drop to the ground with the rest of her creations. Now free, Momo mentally ran through what she knew about Kodai's quirk. When touching something, the girl could alter its size, and like Uraraka, she could undo the change by putting her fingertips together. So far she'd only affected Momo's creations and her uniform, so did that mean she had a limit on her quirk? Did it only affect non-living things? Either way, her best strategy was to fight Kodai at a distance so the girl couldn't make contact with anything Momo created. Alternatively, she could incapacitate the girl and then force her out of bounds, or perform some combination of the two. Unfortunately, Momo's ranged fighting skills were less than stellar. She was trained to be a close-range combatant, making and disposing of weapons and items as needed. Close-range weapons were easy to make: blades, staffs, even objects like shurikens, brass knuckles, knives, and other melee weapons were normally nothing more than one or two materials produced in a particular shape. The more molecularly complex an object was, and the more individual parts that went into the final product, the longer it took for her to create. So more modern weapons like guns would waste valuable time Momo likely wouldn't have when on the job or in a fight. That's not to say she couldn't produce them, just that it was difficult, which was why Momo's go-to ranged weapon was cannons. They were hollow tubes of metal that fired a round of metal, with only a little bit of gunpowder added in to make them go boom. Simple concept, easy to produce, but they were a massive drain on her lipids, and with this being the first round of the finals, Momo wanted to save as much of her energy as she could. Something small, Momo thought, putting her hand behind her back to hide it from view, simple, and easy to use. The ideal tool came to mind, and Momo's body was outlined in the brief light show occurring behind her back as she produced her weapon of choice. Kodai wasn't inactive, however. Reaching down, the quiet girl picked up several small, loose pieces of cement that she clutched in her hand like a bunch of pebbles. "Give up?" she asked quietly. "No, okay." The two girls moved at the same time. Momo's hand rushed forward as the 1A Ravenet threw the flash grenade she made, the small cylinder streaking through the air towards Kodai, who was herself throwing her hand upward to toss her pieces of rock high into the air, enlarging them at the last possible moment just as the flash grenade detonated right in front of her. Kodai recoiled with a shriek, ears ringing and temporarily blinded by the flash of bright light. Momo rushed forward, and though her ears were throbbing a bit, she'd been far enough away and well enough prepared that the effects of the grenade were minimal. Her eyes darted back and forth tracking the enlarged rubble as it fell. Momo dodged the falling rocks, moving swiftly and elegantly, wasting not a single movement as she wove her way towards Kodai. Reaching the incapacitated girl, Momo pushed her to the ground, planting her knee on the crux of her back. Creating another bow staff, she gripped it with both hands, placing the staff horizontally against the back of Kodai's neck, pinning her in place. Kodai ed in pain, eyes clenched shut. Seeing that the 1B heroine wouldn't be moving anytime soon, Midnight raised her hand in the air. "Yui, Kodai is incapacitated." Momo Yaoyorozu advances to the second round. As the crowd cheered, Momo let out her breath and relaxed, letting her tension fade as she stood up. Robots were already making their way onto the damaged field, and Momo could only look on guiltily as Kodai was loaded up and carted off. She hadn't gone too far in her opinion, nor had she pulled out any of the major tricks in her inventory, but seeing Kodai in pain while clutching at her face, Momo couldn't help but feel a little bad for the girl. Shaking her head, Momo tried to clear her thoughts as she made her way to the exit. She knew that Izuku was in the stands with Himiko watching, and wondered what they'd have to say about her performance. And with a dramatic finish, the first round of matches is all done. We'll move on to the second round shortly. But first, one lucky competitor will be getting a bye straight to the semifinals, with Inashi taking their place. Just who has fortune smiling upon them? Let's find out. On the screens throughout the stadium and televisions all over the world, a wheel appeared containing the last name and a headshot of all the students who'd participated in the first round of the finals. Those who'd lost had their pie slice turn gray and fall away, leaving only the winners. Irashi's headshot was off to the side in a small box labeled bye. As viewers looked on, a Chibai Nezu appeared next to the wheel and gave it a spin. The wheel spun around and around with many people yelling out their pick for who they wanted Inashi to replace. Those feeling particularly lucky placed money on their favorite student. Cheers and groans echoed as the wheel finally came to a stop with the camera zooming in on Yaoyorozu's picture, her full name flashing underneath it. Wow, and next round's bye goes to our most recent winner, Momo Yaoyorozu. That gives Yaoyorozu a chance to rest and recover. But it also means we'll get to see more from this festival's standout student when he fights in her place. Don't go anywhere, because we're going to be leaping straight into round 2. Before we begin though, let's see a preview of this round's matchups. Katsuki Bakugo vs Ijiro Kirishima. Shoto Todoroki vs Itsuka Kendo. Fumikage Tokoyami vs Mina Ishido. Setsuna Tokage vs Inase Urashi. By Momo Yaoyorozu. The first match of the second round, both want to claim the top spot. Bakugo versus Kirishima. Right here, right now, I'll show the world what I can do. Ready, start. At the shout, both 1A students charged forward. Just before they met in the middle of the field, Bakugo swung his hand, letting loose with one of his signature explosions. Fire and smoke engulfed Kirishima, but Bakugo didn't lower his guard. Moments later, Kirishima emerged from the smoke unscathed, his skin hardened, launching a punch towards Bakugo's face. Take this. Already on guard, Bakugo dodged to his left, but he wasn't able to keep Kirishima's hardened skin from grazing the right side of his face, cutting it slightly. Still, encountering no resistance, Kirishima overextended himself, allowing Bakugo to launch an explosion into Kirishima's unprotected right side. The redhead grunted. The blast was strong enough to tear through Kirishima's uniform, exposing the skin underneath, now slightly blackened but otherwise undamaged. As both competitors drew back, Kirishima did so smiling. That won't work on me, Bakugo. Kirishima yelled over the roar of the crowd as he charged back in. Bakugo growled as he fell backwards, dodging Kirishima's wild punches. And Bakugo retreats, unable to overcome Kirishima's defense. Present Mike announced. Come on Kira, you can do it. Mina cheered through cupped hands. It's rare to see Bakugo on the defensive, Kiro. Suyu croaked from where the 1A girls sat together. Yeah, you think Kirishima has a chance of winning? Gyro asked, resting her head on her arms currently draped over the railing in front of her. No, the Class 1A representatives answered at the same time. Turning their hardened eyes away from the match, the two looked at each other surprised, but a gesture of concession from Yaoyorozu led Kendo to explain. Kirishima's quirk might be making it difficult for Bakugo since he can withstand his explosions, but it's clear that Kirishima isn't used to fighting. His swings are wild, and besides his opening attack where he grazed Bakugo, he hasn't been able to hit him since Bakugo turned his attention to dodging. So Mina huffed, pouting, her pink cheeks inflated to show her displeasure at the ravenet, and orange jetsed out. Bakugo's attacks won't do anything, and even if he can't hit him now, Kirishima's bound to eventually, right? That would be the case normally, Momo said agreeably, cutting in to ward off any arguing before it could break out. However, it takes more energy for Kirishima to attack than it takes for Bakugo to dodge. Combine that with him having to keep his quirk active and wasting additional energy due to his lack of form. An explosion cut her off. Bakugo finally counters again. How what's this unlike before? It's working. You've been straining to keep your whole body rock hard the entire fight, right? Bakugo questioned with a demonic smile as Kirishima grimaced in pain, a new hole in the left side of his uniform. Unlike its twin on Kirishima's right side, the skin underneath this new hole was singed. Your quirk might make you harder, but it draws on your stamina to stay up. Do too many things at once in that state, like rushing forward to attack, and your defense will eventually start to fall apart. Drawing back his arm, Bakugo launched an explosion, forcing Kirishima to quickly raise his arms to guard. The smoke dissipated quickly, but Kirishima only had time to widen his eyes before another explosion slammed into him, then another, and another. Bakugo launched a veritable barrage at the redhead, attacking as quickly as the recoil of the explosions pushed his hands backwards. All Kirishima could do was retreat behind the defense his quirk provided, grimacing as Bakugo's explosions tore his uniform to shreds and his hardened skin began to chip away. Seeing Kirishima's armor falter, Bakugo rushed forward to deliver the finishing blow. "Die!" he screamed, launching a final large explosion into Kirishima's. The red-headed hardening hero in training was blown backwards, eyes glazing over as Bakugo grinned savagely, gasping slightly. Well, I can understand why you wouldn't want to fight me in a drawn-out match. Kirishima is unable to battle. Bakugo wins. Midnight announced with the F of her whip once it became clear that Kirishima wouldn't be getting back up. And we have our second semifinalists, Katsuki. Bakugo present Mike yelled over the roar of the crowd. As UA robots loaded Kirishima onto a stretcher, Bakugo made his way back towards the student tunnel, where the next competitor stood waiting silently. Neither student spoke as Bakugo strode past before stopping, their backs to one another. "Oi, half and half," Bakugo called out. Said boy turned to find himself looking at Bakugo's back, the blonde not having even bothered to turn around. "Remember what I said in the locker room, it doesn't matter that you beat me in the other events, because at the end of the day, I'm gonna win this facade of a festival." Todoroki's eyes narrowed as Bakugo turned his head slightly, allowing Todoroki to glimpse the dark smile splitting his face. "I bet right now you're thinking that you can still win with just your ice. That even if the copycat who used your quirk lost, you still have a chance. After all, he might have had your quirk, but he clearly didn't have your control over it. Your skill with it. And what if I am?" Todoroki questioned coldly. "Copycat came at me with everything he could draw upon, ice and fire, but he still lost in the end. Do you honestly think a match between the two of us would be any different when you refused to even use half of your quirk?" Bakugo turned back and resumed his walk away, throwing out one more remark as he went. "At this rate, for all your talk about being the best, the one moving on to the semifinals, it won't be you." Todoroki didn't respond, but his heterochromatic eyes stayed locked onto the back of Bakugo's uniform until the boy was out of sight. It's now time for the second match. Both competitors have given top-class performances at this year's sports festival Kendo. Todoroki's gonna come at me with his ice as soon as the match begins. I have to be ready. Versus Todoroki. She's strong, I have to end this quickly before she has time to act. Ready. One thing's clear. From the start, I have to go all out. Start. A wave of ice immediately erupted from Todoroki's foot, racing across the arena to Kendo, who cursed. Enlarging her hand, she channeled the power of One for All before letting loose with a wild swing. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze, before the glacier of ice cracked and shattered. A blast of air rushed across the arena, pushing Todoroki back, although he quickly caught himself by creating a half-circle of ice behind him. The cold wind rushed through the audience, forcing many to cower or brace themselves until it passed. While Kendo managed to stop Todoroki's attack with pure strength, Present Mic announced to the roar of the crowd cheering on the spectacle, not that either competitor cared. Once more, Todoroki launched a wave of ice, only for Kendo to destroy it with a one-for-all infused punch. 2 more times this repeated, until both competitors paused to recover and think. My hands are almost at their limit, Kendo grimaced, looking down at her enlarged hands, which were now an ominous shade of red. Even though my hands can withstand the full power of one for all when I enlarge them, they can't do it forever. That's why I alternated the hand I was punching with. Even then, each hand probably has one more punch left. Any more after that though, and they'll start to fracture, if not break. Still, Kendo looked across the arena to where Todoroki stood exhaling mist. The right side of his body dotted with frost. His attacks are getting smaller. He's weakening. This match is going on for too long. Todoroki frowned as he gazed towards the panting Orangeette. There's no doubt that Kendo's pushing herself, but even if she's approaching her limit, so am I put too much power into those earlier attacks hoping to end the match before she had time to counter. Since she was able to hold on this long, her best bet's to turn this into an endurance match. I need to end this quickly. Once more Todoroki sent a wave of ice at Kendo, only for it to shatter when she countered. This time though, Todoroki pushed through the blowback sent his way, building a spire of ice in front of Kendo that he ran up, the icy memorial concealing him from Kendo's view. With a swing of her left hand, the Orangeette's hands reached their limit. The spire was blown away, only to reveal Todoroki falling towards Kendo, his hand outstretched towards her. Shit cursing, Kendo leapt backwards, but she was unable to stop Todoroki from touching the ground where she'd just been standing, sending a trail of ice rushing her way. Airborne, the ice quickly reached Kendo, ensnaring her right foot before it began to crawl up her leg. He's too close, Kendo cried out in her mind. At this range, Todoroki can send his glaciers at me before I have time to react. It was only when we were further apart that we fought on even ground. I have to get him away from me. It only took a moment for all this to run through Kendo's mind. But that was all the time needed for the ice to finish crawling up the lower part of her leg. As the ice touched her knee, Kendo's instincts took over. Before she could think, her left arm was drawn back, orange veins glowing with the power of one for all before Big Fist activated. Just like in her match against Shoji, it wasn't just Kendo's hand that grew, but her arm as well, tearing through the sleeve of her uniform. With a primitive roar, Kendo brought her enlarged arm forward and the ice shattered, blowing Todoroki back. With the ice now gone, Kendo fell back to the stage, her mind catching up with what just happened as her quirks deactivated, causing her arm to shrink back down to its normal size. Is that how it works? Kendo wondered, staring at her now exposed limb. I've always enlarged my hands before using one for all. If I reverse it and activate one for all first, does one for all boost my quirk, allowing me to enlarge other parts of my body? That punch was weaker than your other ones. Todoroki's voice cut through Kendo's racing mind, and the Orangeette turned to lock eyes with the heterochromatic boy. You've never increased the size of anything but your hands either. Have you been hiding what you can do? Todoroki's normally stoic voice was strained with emotion, and Kendo couldn't help but widen her eyes in shock. Todoroki was never emotional. Answer me. Yeah, he was angry. Seeing that Kendo didn't seem interested in sharing, Todoroki growled before he began running forward. He's slower, Kendo thought as she fell into a fighting stance, and the frost has spread. But if it's only affecting his right side, which is the side he uses to produce ice, then the best moment to strike is now. As Todoroki's right foot left the ground, Kendo struck. Bringing her right arm forward, the Orangeette repeated what she'd done earlier, channeling the power of one for all and then big fist through her right arm. Just like her left arm had done, Kendo's right arm grew, shredding her sleeve before slamming into Todoroki's. Unprepared, spittle flew as Todoroki was sent flying backwards, tumbling head over heels, but even still he managed to freeze Kendo's left arm with his right hand. He's good, Kendo thought warily, as she eyed Todoroki. His skill, his mastery of his quirk, everything about him shows just how strong he is. With another brief respite in the fighting, Kendo didn't hesitate to practice using her new ability. Deactivating the power in her right arm, Kendo focused on increasing her left, growing it to a point the ice shattered and fell away before she let it shrink down once more. Todoroki's right, Kendo thought as said boy rose. That attack wasn't as strong as when I use one for all through my enlarged hands. Still, it was stronger than Big Fist by itself. Plus, she looked down at her reddened hands. Even though my hands are at their limit, they didn't break. I may not be able to fight the same way I did earlier, but this way, I can keep going. Coughing, Todoroki climbed back to his feet, every exhale now accompanied by a fine mist. A light layer of frost coated his cheek, his arm, his leg, practically dotting his entire right side. Eyes furrowed, glaring, Todoroki sent ice at Kendo, but the attack was both slow and small enough that the Orangeette could dodge it, leaping to the side. Why Todoroki charged as Kendo's right arm grew. Prepared, Todoroki dodged to the side, but the force of the attack still sent him smashing into his ice. Why? Kendo blinked. Why? Todoroki repeated, raising his head, his two colored eyes staring into Kendo's own. Why did you hold back? Why are you trying so hard, you, Honuki, Bakugo? Why is every one of you so determined to win? Unspoken, another question was asked in his mind. Why is it when I'm facing you all, I can almost forget his face? Todoroki, do you remember what I said in the locker room this morning? The son of the number 2 hero blinked dumbly. No one here's just going to roll over and let you win. Hero course, support course, general studies, everyone is doing their best to win. Everyone except for you. Shut up. Tell me, do you even want to win? Shut up. Do you even want to be a hero? Todoroki's eyes widened in shock. A memory he'd all but forgotten rose unbidden to his mind. The day's training had been particularly harsh. Curled up into a shodo, Todoroki clutched his stomach as he cried, his head lying in a pool of his own vomit, all while Endeavor stared down at him in disgust. The door to the training room was thrown open, feet pattered against the wooden floors, but Todoroki couldn't bring himself to turn and look to see who it was. Please stop, he's only 5. The voice of his mother had cut off whatever it was Endeavor was saying. Shoto relaxed slightly when her cool hand made contact with his warm back, gently rubbing soothing circles into it. He's already 5, get out of my way. The sound of flesh on flesh caused Shoto to look up. Look as his mom fell backwards, her right hand rising to clutch her shocked face, the side of which was already starting to redden. Endeavor stood there frozen, his hand outstretched, his former stoicism replaced with an expression of disbelief as he gazed at his fallen wife. I too have to go. Endeavor rushed out, pushing through the doorway and past Fayumi, who was crouching behind the door, peering in with Natsuo right beside her. That night, Shoto had knelt on his mother's lap, face buried against her shirt as he sobbed into her bosom. I don't want to be a hero, Mama. I don't want to become like Dad. I don't want to become somebody who hurts you. A soft, cool hand on the back of his head had calmed him as his mom gently did his hair. Oh, Shoto. Don't say that, not all heroes are bad. Shoto had looked up at his mom's gray eyes that looked just like his right one. You want to be a hero, right? To help people, it's okay for you to be one. You don't have to be a prisoner of your. It's okay for you to become whoever you want to be. As the memory of his mother's words fell away, Todoroki's left side began to steam before fire erupted from his body. The heat was enough to force Kendo back, and those close to the arena had to shield their faces against the sudden brightness and heat. The frost coating Todoroki's right side steamed as it evaporated and disappeared. I want to be a hero. Kendo looked up, the two students once more locking eyes, an understanding passing through them that this was it. Sorry, Todoroki, Kendo couldn't help but smile as she planted her feet and channeled one for all throughout her entire body. I'm glad you finally decided to go plus ultra, but I'm going to be the one who wins. Smiling in this situation, just how crazy are you crouching? Todoroki gave out a final warning, don't blame me for whatever happens next. Ice sprouted from the ground around him while the fire that burnt across his left side grew into a raging inferno. Cementos, stop them before they go any further, Midnight ordered. If they go all out right now, we won't be able to guarantee the safety of the audience. Cementos grunted as he planted his hands against the cement pillar he'd been sitting atop. Waves of cement moved towards the battlefield, but it was slow, too slow. At an unspoken signal, the two students moved. Todoroki sent out a wave of ice, one comparable to the glacier he'd used at the start of the first round when he tried to entrap Honuki. Kendo leapt over the ice, ignoring the pain that ran through her legs or how the ice curled behind her like a wave to come back at her. One for all, then big fist, then one for all again. So what if my hand breaks? This is it. I've got to give everything I've got. As Kendo raced towards him, her right arm growing in size before it became coated in those strange orange veins of hers, Todoroki couldn't help but return her wide smile. Bringing his left arm forward, hand glowing orange from how hot it was, Todoroki directed the flames he'd shunned for so long, embracing his quirk's full power just as Kendo brought her arm forward. The collision of attacks sent the strongest wind yet hurling through the stadium, forcing everyone, be they civilian or hero, to shield themselves. Midnight yelped as her stage was sent flying. Just because something is powerful doesn't necessarily mean it's good, Cementos muttered as he rose to his feet, ears ringing. Still, this is impressive. Eraserhead, Mike complained, microphone off. Just what the heck is up with your class? Just like when Bakugo faced Monoma, Todoroki's ice at the beginning cooled the air, which expanded when he used his fire. Aizawa's bored voice explained over the stadium speakers. Still, we can't see a thing. Hey, Midnight, who won grumbling. The R-rated heroine climbed back to her feet, rubbing her head. As the smoke dissipated, the audience leaned forward in eager anticipation. Two shapes could be made out, one on the field who, as the audience watched, stumbled before falling down to one knee. The other lay limply out of bounds, slumped against a wall. Shoto, Todoroki is out of bounds, Midnight yelled, her voice echoing throughout the silent stadium. Drawing her whip from her belt, she pointed it at the kneeling victor. Izuku Kendo advances to the third round. There was cheering at the announcement, but it was muted, the audience still reeling in shock from the clash of quirks that had just occurred. I see, Izuku thought, hands folded in front of his face while he rested his elbows on his knees. That's Izuku Kendo, the girl Momo told me about. I understand the confusion when it came to her description of the veins. They don't have any clear connection to her quirk besides increasing her strength. Her ability to increase the size of other parts of her body also seems to be newly developed. Interesting, very interesting. While Izuku's thoughts were focused on the match, his companions weren't. I'm so bored. Himiko complained, still disguised as a violet-eyed revenet. Maintaining a form for so long would normally be a massive drain on Himiko's supply. After she'd fled from home and actually started using her quirk, Himiko had experimented with her quirk to survive on the cruel backstreets of Japan, knowing just what she, and by extension her quirk, were capable of, was a necessity. Himiko had eventually figured out that a cup of equated to roughly a day of transformation. Getting that much though was hard, especially since Himiko didn't have either the training or the time to properly drain a person. She couldn't just hang out around the bodies of those she killed and wait. There was no telling when a hero might show up. But then she'd met Izuku. Izuku, who'd used his connections with a guy named Sensei to reward her after the Hasekai raid with 5 whole gallons of from different people who'd mysteriously vanished. Himiko didn't care though, the world was cruel, but she had her and her Izuku. Ah, Izuku. Himiko blushed, focusing back on the boy in front of her. First we go on a date, then you act all cool and bossy, going so far as to take a hostage. You really know how to show a girl a good time. While Himiko rubbed her thighs together to sate the burning desire of her love, Lady Nagant's attention was split, alternating between the still smoking battlefield and the green-haired villain sitting next to her. Just as soon as the first word spilled from her mouth, she'd known she'd made a mistake. A moment of weakness, of doubt, and she opened up to a villain of all things. Just how weak-willed was she? She hadn't spilt everything. In fact, she'd only touched on the bare basics, the things that he likely could find out for himself, or already knew. Her recruitment by the Commission, her training, her early assignments, and finally her murder of Crimson Riot. Izuku hadn't once questioned her, nor had he spoken. He had done exactly as he promised, listening silently as she spoke. His silence had been both a blessing and a curse. A blessing in that he didn't judge her, didn't rage and hurl her actions back in her face. Yet, at the same time, she almost wished he had. Once she'd finished talking, fallen silent, head down staring at her empty plate, Izuku had simply asked if she was done. With what her career, the lies, her food, her silence was an answer all its own, so together they'd made their way back to their seats. Izuku's bodyguard, Toga, slipping from the crowd as soon as they began moving to follow them. Occasionally, Izuku's eyes wandered over towards her, but most of the time he kept his attention on the action below. It was maddening, and yet also relieving. Wait, do I seriously feel better now that I've talked about my feelings? Nagant thought in disbelief. You have got to be kidding me. Still she bit her lip, eyes furrowing once more to look at the brunette's side. I really wish I knew what he was thinking. You're an idiot. Kendo yelped as her professional diagnosis was delivered with a rap to the noggin by Recovery Girl's cane. By all rights, I should declare you ineligible to continue. Right arm broken along with your hand and fingers. Strained legs and tendons from that jump of yours. A fracture in your left hand. Just what exactly do you have to say for yourself? I'm sorry, you better be. Kendo flinched the best she could as the cane smacked into the floor. Still, Recovery Girl sighed. It's not the worst I've seen, so while you will be tired, you'll still be able to continue if you want to. Just be glad it's clear that you're using that brain of yours. If you were like that blonde oaf, charging in recklessly without a second thought, I'd likely tie you to this bed and never let you leave the room. Kendo chuckled, good joke. When Recovery Girl remained silent, Kendo struggled to sit up in her hospital bed. That was a joke, right? Recovery Girl merely turned, flashing Kendo a disarming grandmotherly smile. Kendo gulped before crawling back down under the covers. Maybe it was best not to piss off the diminutive nurse. Sorry for the delay, folks, but after the last match's explosive finish, we needed some time to repair the field. But now we're back with round 3, Tokoyami versus Ashido. Ready, start. Dark Shadow. I'm on it at his master's command. The shadowy quirk zigzagged across the field, arms outstretched to grab the pink alien. But, at the moment of contact, the quirk yelped in pain, quickly letting go and retreating. Dark Shadow, Tokoyami cried out in concern. Sorry, Ashido called as she raced forward past the sentient shadow. The moment the match had started, Ashido had cloaked her arms and shoulders in acid, figuring that Tokoyami would try to have Dark Shadow push her out of bounds the same way he'd done with Shinso. Letting the acid slide down her arms and congeal in her hands, Ashido raced towards Tokoyami, throwing blobs of acid as she went. Tokoyami was forced to retreat, dodging backwards in order to keep her at a distance. Dark Shadow, I need your help, Tokoyami called out. Pushing through the pain, Dark Shadow roared as it came at Ashido a second time. Hands out, Dark Shadow was just about to grab Ashido from behind when the pinkette dropped, falling into a split as she raised her arms to point overhead directly at Dark Shadow. Acid sprayed from her hands and Dark Shadow screeched as it hit home, the quirk quickly falling back to disappear into a shocked Tokoyami. Dark Shadow, are you done? Tokoyami asked, concerned instead of angry. A wisp sprouted, yellow eyes wide as if the quirk was about to cry, though it only nodded. Very well, I resign. Tokoyami sighed before bowing to Ishido. Tokoyami gives up. Mina. Ishido advances to the third round as an overjoyed Ishido screeched in excitement with the crowds cheering. Ada could only smile in faint amusement, applauding his friend's performance before the sound of his phone ringing distracted him. Checking his caller ID, Ada quickly rushed to make his excuses before making his way to the hallway behind the 1A seats. Hello, Neeson. I am sorry to report that I lost in the first round of the finals, Ada said stiffly. A laugh sounded over the phone. Don't worry about it, you're a first year and a student of UA. At that, you're going up against the best of the best. All this means is that you'll need to train and get stronger. Ada said, standing back straight. I will do my best. Still as stiff as ever, don't ever change. I watched your match, even if it wasn't what you hoped for, you still made it to the finals. Odds are you're going to get quite a few offers. Speaking of learning opportunities, I got one that you might be interested in. Really? Ada's brow furrowed. Yeah, remember how growing up, you always said you wanted to patrol with me? Of course. Wait, you don't mean? That's right, consider this a professional offer from the Team Idaitan agency and the Pro Hero Ingenium. You don't have to take it if you don't want to, or if you get an offer from someone else you'd rather pursue. If you want to go somewhere else, don't refuse on account of me. Take your time, think this through, and know that whatever choice you make, I'm proud of you. Ada sniffled, eyes wet and shining. Thank you. You're crying, aren't you? No. There was a sigh over the phone. Geez, what am I going to do with you? I swear, just yesterday, I was bringing you to my agency so my sidekicks could meet the cute younger brother I was always going on about. Now here you are, all grown up and training to be a hero right alongside your big brother. Well, I won't keep you since I know you're busy. Enjoy the festival. I will. Lowering the phone, Ada couldn't contain the tears that fell, dotting his phone screen. As Tensei hung up, Ada's background came into focus, displaying a photo of a young Tenya. Ada looking up, eyes wide in awe as he clutched the armored leg of an in costume Ingenium. It's time for the final match of round 2. 1B's last remaining students, both of whom entered through recommendation, face off to determine just who is the strongest from their class. Whoever wins will have to confront 1A's remnant. It's Tokage versus Urashi. Ready, begin. Damn it, Tokage roared in frustration as she charged forward recklessly, a sharp contrast to the composed and pitying persona she'd possessed when facing Uraraka. Even if I'm going to lose, I'm still going to try my best. Plus ultra and all that. Urashi's smile widened. Good, that's the spirit of UA. I love to see so much. Show me what you can do, Tokage. Thrusting his hand forward, Urashi sent a burst of wind at the green-haired girl, which smashed into Tokage, flinging her over the line and out of bounds. Before she could hit the ground though, Tokage's body split the floating pieces, flying just above the grass as they circled around to come at Urashi from the side. Even though Tokage is technically out of bounds, since she never made contact with the ground, I'll allow her to continue, Midnight announced before any questions could be raised. The two competitors didn't care. As Tokage's body flew at him, Urashi redirected the air around him, molding it into a circular upwards draft that drew in the greenette's pieces, and trapping her. Whirling around in the miniature twister, Tokage's pieces drew together and reconnected until the sharp-toothed girl had fully remade her limbs, torso, and head, where her sharp teeth were grinding together, although all 6 body parts remained separate from one another. As members of the same class, Tokage and Urashi had faced each other before in hero training exercises, and every match always ended the same way, with Tokage's pieces entrapped in a miniature tornado just like they were now. In preparation for the festival, Tokage had worked tirelessly to devise a way to face Urashi, but she hadn't exactly been able to test it for fear of giving it away. Don't think this match is over yet, Urashi, Tokage called as she mentally prepared to enact her plan. Turning her head so she was facing Urashi head on, the buzzcut boy's head turned to track her as she spoke. After all, what's a competition without a major upset? At the word upset, Tokage's reformed body separated. But instead of dispersing and moving the pieces as a single unit like she normally did, Tokage instead mentally hurled each piece of her body as far away from each other as she could. Her range could only extend so far, and she could feel herself losing control of some pieces as they slipped beyond her reach. Thankfully, losing pieces wasn't a big deal since Tokage was able to regenerate, even if there was a limit to how much she could heal. Still, her plan worked, and multiple pieces of her body managed to slip free of Urashi's wind. Urashi's concentration turned from Tokage's head as the pieces slipped out of his control, though he quickly began to weave the air around him to recapture them. Unfortunately for Urashi, this too was part of Tokage's plan. Distracted by his need to focus on bending the winds to his will, Urashi hadn't noticed one of Tokage's arms had remained whole, floating in place in the wind current behind him, its fist pointed at his back. At a mental command, the fist separated from the arm, rocketing forward to slam into Urashi's back. And Tokage manages to land the first blow on Urashi of the day. Grunting at the sudden impact, Urashi stumbled forward. It was only for a moment, but it was enough for him to lose control of the winds, which immediately died down. Knowing this was the only chance she would get, Tokage mentally hurled every piece of her body at Urashi that she could. As the pieces closed in, for a moment Tokage thought she had done it, that she had managed to get the better of the best student in her class if not her year. That hope died though as Urashi looked up at her rapidly approaching head with that damn grin of his. Grasping a hold of the dissipating air, Urashi redirected it downwards, sending a massive invisible force straight down on the unsuspecting Tokage. Wind roared in her ears, which quickly popped as Tokage's body was pinned to the ground. Tokage squeaked in pain. Tokage has surrendered. Inasa Urashi advances after his bye in the last round. The return of the first-year standout combined with a dominating victory over a recommendation student. The announcement was heralded with widespread cheering. And that concludes the second round. We'll be moving straight into round 3, but first, we need to figure out just who will be taking Yaoyorozu's place as the next round bye with free passage straight to the finals. Once more, a wheel appeared on the stadium screens containing the last name and a headshot of all the students who'd made it to the second round of the finals. The losers' slices turned gray and fell away, leaving only the 4 students who remained, Yaoyorozu's headshot having replaced Urashi's in the bye box. Once more, Chibinezu appeared to give the 4-way wheel a spin. Around it went as the audience looked on with bated breath and eager anticipation. Bakugo looked on, face blank, while Urashi sported an eager smile. Kendo slept in her bed, under recovery girl's supervision. The nurse would wake her if she had to. Only Mina seemed desperate, having apparently realized just who it was she'd be facing if she wasn't chosen. The Pinkette's eyes were closed and her fingers were crossed while she whispered a rapid but quiet, "Please, please, please," to the universe. Unfortunately for Ishido, the universe didn't seem to want to listen to her plea as the wheel came to a stop on Kendo's picture. And we have our first finalist, Itsuke Dio Mike announced. She's given an impressive performance so far and she'll soon be joined by 2 others. For those of you in need of a reminder of what the matches look like, here's an updated tournament bracket. Katsuki Bakugo vs Momo Yaoyorozu. Mina Ishido vs Inasa Urashi. By Itsuka Kendo. And now, without any further ado, let's start the semifinals. Never before had the simple act of walking been so hard. Every step was harder to complete than the last, her feet feeling like they weighed a ton as she continued onwards. She felt sick, lightheaded, like she could pass out at any moment. The roaring of the crowd seemed muted as if coming from far away, and her stomach had twisted itself into a Gordian knot. She was sweating. Why was she sweating? Why was it only now for this fight that her nerves made themselves apparent? She looked up, onyx orbs locking with red. No, it wasn't him, it couldn't be him. She'd wanted this. Wanted to put him in his place for months back before she'd even known who he was. She wasn't going to back down now because she was a little nervous. She wasn't scared. She couldn't be. Aren't you, though? Doubt whispered in her ear. Izuku Midoriya is the strongest man you know, and this boy, Katsuki Bakugo, scares even him. Because Bakugo tormented him for years, Momo replied viciously, not giving the voice even a moment to respond. Took every opportunity he had to remind Izuku of his proper place. Burned the message into his body until the fear sunk in and became instinctive. Her mind flashed back to the dream she'd had, of Izuku tormented by Bakugo sinking into the black sludge. No, she realized, she wasn't scared of Bakugo. She was nervous because of who was no doubt looking down at her even now through emerald eyes. Izuku was watching her, and this next fight was more important to them than anyone else could ever know. Ignoring Mike's introduction, Momo focused on Bakugo. The blonde was tense, like a rabid hunting dog waiting to be let loose. Closing her eyes, Momo took a deep breath, letting the tension and nerves drain away before exhaling, opening her eyes as she did so. You know, Momo called out, I've been wanting to face you in combat since our first day of classes. Oh, Bakugo crossed his arms in front of his. Why didn't you say something then, Ponytail? I would have been more than happy to prove I'm better than one of UA's legendary recommendation students. Momo shook her head before resting her cheek against her hand. No, she sighed, arranging a battle exercise between the 2 of us just because of a desire to test myself would be most unbecoming of a future heroine. Then again, Momo raked her eyes over Bakugo's form. I could see someone like you engaging in such barbaric and villainous behavior. Bakugo's eyes narrowed as he stilled. Besides, in case you forgot, our first heroics class was all about protecting our president, not engaging in combat. Momo's eyes widened as she held her hands in front of her mouth in mock surprise. Oh, I'm sorry. You and your team failed that exercise, didn't you? Veins throbbing, Bakugo lowered himself to a crouch. Keep talking, Ponytail. All you're doing is giving me more of a reason to blast you out of this arena. And that's another thing, Momo said, raising her hand to her hair, loosening it from its signature style to let it hang loose across her back. My name isn't Ponytail, it's Momo Yaoyorozu. Remember it. Make me. With pleasure. Eyes narrowed, the 2 students waited in eager anticipation for the battle to commence. Having already done their introductions, the 2 didn't have to wait long for President Mike's command of start to ring out. Palms open behind him, Bakugo propelled himself forward using explosions to enhance his speed. As the blonde rapidly approached, Momo formed her reliable bow staff, gripping it with both hands. Stepping forward, she swiped at Bakugo the moment he came within range. But Bakugo wasn't content to just stand there and take the blow. As Momo swung, Bakugo brought a hand forward, letting loose an explosion to the ground in front of him. Momo's attack cut through the makeshift smokescreen as Bakugo was lifted into the air above her head. He's behind me, Momo thought, her head turning to track him as her back, hidden underneath her uniform top, began to glow. Indeed, despite being upside down in the air, Bakugo grabbed his right wrist with his left hand, using it to stabilize himself as he unleashed an explosion into Momo's defenseless back. The explosion pushed Bakugo away from the Ravenet, allowing him enough space to rotate himself midair and land back on his feet. Momo too fell forward from the force of the blast, her top and shirt tearing away as an armored shield burst through them. The shield protected Momo from the majority of the damage, but the girl still had to turn her forward fall into a controlled tumble to come up crouched on all fours, her staff still clutched in her right hand. Completing the shield, Momo let it detach from her back, sliding down her body to fall to the stadium floor with a dull thud. As Present Mike narrated their opening moves, neither student paused to catch their breath, instead charging towards each other once more. Drawing back his hand, Bakugo's palm sparked as he prepared to let loose with an explosion. Having caught on to Bakugo's habit of prioritizing his right hand when attacking, Momo swiftly smashed her staff into his wrist, the hard metal pole redirecting it away from her as his explosion blasted the empty air to her left. Momo didn't give Bakugo time to recoup as the butt of her staff came up to smash into the underside of his arm, before she half-turned, using her momentum to strengthen her thrust as she slammed the tip of her staff into Bakugo's exposed. An explosion from Bakugo's left hand forced Momo backwards as Bakugo retreated, wheezing, his left hand cradling his while his right arm hung limply by his side. Momo had little doubt it was either throbbing in pain or more likely numb from the adrenaline running through them both. Good, best to keep him angry, Momo thought. Despite his poor personality, Bakugo was one of the smartest students in the class, and his battlefield intelligence was no less impressive. By keeping him from thinking clearly, she could hopefully continue the momentum she'd built up thus far. If Momo was the same girl she'd been a year ago, she had little doubt Bakugo would have already won. Back then she'd often overthink, becoming paralyzed and struggling to react to sudden or unexpected actions. Training with Izuku for months on end had helped her overcome that particular weakness, something she was thankful for. Otherwise, she had little doubt Bakugo's explosive attack to her back would have all but put her out of commission when she failed to react in time. Momo went to move forward and press Bakugo, but the blonde let loose an explosion that covered the area around him in smoke, hiding him from view and forcing the Ravenet to draw back. Bakugo's explosions had a wide area of damage, and if she wasn't careful, he could easily catch her in one. He's giving himself time to think while lowering my ability to react, Momo realized, her brows furrowing as her mind raced. Bakugo knows it takes time for me to create objects and remember their formula. He's likely counting on being able to create explosions faster than I can react and create a tool to assist me. I can try to create objects before he attacks, but I run the risk of creating the wrong thing and wasting lipids. The sound of muted explosions brought Momo's attention back to the smoke. Directing her staff at it, Momo's eyes widened as Bakugo emerged above her, one hand stretched out in front of him while he used the other to form a circle on the palm of his outstretched hand. He's focusing his explosions, Momo realized as her eyes widened. AP shot, autocannon. Bakugo yelled. Concentrated bursts of fire erupted from Bakugo's palm, raining down on Momo. Dropping her staff, Momo created a shield above her head, clutching it with both hands as Bakugo's explosion slammed into her improvised defense and the field around her. Rubble flew, and Momo grunted as pieces of debris struck her unprotected body. When the rain of hellfire stopped, Momo didn't even have time to lower her shield before something smashed into it, the heavy object knocking her onto her back. A kick from Bakugo knocked the shield away before the blonde crouched over Momo's splayed-out body, his left hand pinning her right arm to the ground while his right foot pressed down on her left wrist. His knee dug into her stomach, making it hard for her to breathe while his right hand hung threateningly over her head. "What was that about making me remember your name?" Bakugo smiled savagely. Momo stayed silent, mind racing. "Give up, Ponytail," the blonde instructed. "I have a final to prepare for, and I don't have any more time to waste on an extra like you." Momo didn't respond as her mind latched onto a means of escaping. "Give up," Bakugo repeated, his palm sparking to highlight his order. "Yaoyorozu?" Midnight questioned, her voice laced with concern. The rules were clear, Momo either had to be out of bounds, surrender, or be unable to continue for the match to be decided. She wasn't anywhere near the boundary lines, and she still technically had the ability to fight back. If she didn't surrender, Bakugo was within his right to blast her, but it wouldn't look good for either the school or Bakugo if he did. "Last chance, Ponytail," Bakugo warned as his palm began to audibly pop like firecrackers. "Give up." "I told you," Momo said, her voice low, "my name's not Ponytail." Before Bakugo could let loose with his threatened explosion, Momo activated her quirk and, to the confusion of the audience, Bakugo screamed before falling backwards. Red dripped onto the field as it was revealed just what exactly Momo had done. Underneath where Bakugo had been pinning her, the Ravenet had created metal spikes, which had risen from her body to pierce Bakugo's hand, foot, and leg respectively. Prone on the ground, Momo created a metal pole from her back, using it to raise herself into a standing position while her right arm started glowing dangerously as she drew it back. Eyes burning with rage, Bakugo unleashed his promised explosion. But the pain of Momo's sudden attack kept it from being as dangerous as it could have been. Momo tanked the hit and emerged from the smoke, albeit with burns and ash littering her exposed body. But what shocked those looking on the most were the crystals enshrouding her right arm. Bakugo only had time to widen his eyes before Momo's fist slammed into his, sending the blonde sprawling backwards. Momo pressed her advantage, rushing forward even as Bakugo rose unsteadily to one knee, his palms pressed into the ground in front of him despite his injured hand, and the pain said action caused him. Letting out an explosion from each hand, Bakugo tore up the field in front of him, sending chunks of concrete flying at Momo, who instinctively raised her hands to protect her face. The pain of his injured hand was only worsened by the explosions he launched from the bleeding palm. Yet Bakugo didn't hesitate to leap forward, biting down on his tongue hard enough to draw when he stepped on his injured foot. Arms raised, Momo couldn't see Bakugo or protect her stomach when Bakugo slammed his injured hand into it, letting out an explosion directly into her flesh. Momo gasped as she flew backwards, crystals shattering when she hit the ground, her eyes wide while Bakugo pressed on, ignoring the pain that burned through his body with every action. As Momo struggled to her feet, Bakugo propelled himself unsteadily into the air and over the ravenet. Reaching down to grab her by her head and shoulder, Bakugo let gravity pull him down as he used his momentum to throw Momo towards the edge of the field. Momo fell just short of the line, eyes widening as she realized how close she was. Momo rushed to stand up, her glowing as she reached down with her hands to grab the net that emerged from her stomach. Looking up, Momo didn't see the charging Bakugo she had expected, instead finding the blonde standing where he'd landed after he threw her. Bakugo stood unsteadily on his feet, trailing down his legs and dripping from his hand. His right palm was directed towards her, the other forming a circle in front of it. Momo's glowed as she threw her net, directing whatever lipids she had towards her stomach as she formed a desperate shield while Bakugo weakly called out the name of his attack, AP shot. A beam of fire erupted from his hand, the explosion drowning out Bakugo's pain scream as he threw his head back to yell. The explosion tore through the net, destroying it before slamming into the shield adorning Momo's. For a moment the two forces clashed as the audience looked on with eager anticipation, until a pain scream the metal of Momo's shield cracked and tore apart. What was left of the weakened explosion smashed into the ravenets and launched her backwards off her feet. For a moment, it seemed like Yaoyorozu hung in the air like an angel, torn scraps of her uniform floating around her like burning feathers. But then she fell, landing in the soft grass that surrounded the field, unmoving. All was silent before Midnight's whip cracked through the air. Yaoyorozu was out of bounds. Bakugo advances. The R-rated heroine announced. And with an explosive finale, Bakugo becomes our second finalist. Present mics announced as the crowd roared its approval. Poor Momo, Ashido said sadly. Man, Bakugo didn't hesitate at all, Kaminari said as he leaned back, hands behind his head. But what a battle, Kirishima grinned, eyes shining. It was close, Kiro. Sue mused, a finger at the corner of her mouth. So the finale will be Kendo, Bakugo, and Uraraka, Shiro said as he counted the three out on his fingers. Hey, don't count Mina out just yet. Hagakure shouted as she stood up, or at least that's what the rest of the class assumed from the floating uniform. The class glanced at one another. Sorry Hagakure, Shiro said, rubbing the back of his head, but Ashido's fighting Uraraka, and to be honest, I don't see how she could possibly win. Izuku-kun, are you alright? As Himiko's voice softly tickled his ear, Izuku opened his eyes, looking down at the field below for the first time since the match was called. There was no sign of either Bakugo or Momo, the two having disappeared as medical robots hauled them away. Below, Cementos had his hands pressed into the damaged field, fixing it once more while over the speakers. Present might continue to rave about the dramatic battle that had just occurred. I'm fine, Izuku said quietly, his voice low for only his companion to hear. Are you sure? Izuku's eyes darted to the heroine seated next to him. Nagant's gaze was directed downwards towards the field below, her expression pensive, but Izuku couldn't shake the feeling that she was deliberately trying not to look at him. Yes, he said, despite wanting to say the opposite. Watching the two fight had been both satisfying and terrifying on equal level. Every blow Momo landed felt like payback for one Bakugo had inflicted. Every explosion had Izuku trying not to wince in sympathy. It was a tug-of-war in the ending. Well, even though Izuku had wanted Momo to win, he knew better than anyone just how strong the blonde was. Everything fine? Nagant asked as she finally looked at him. Izuku turned, flashing a disarming smile. Just peaky, he replied. Mina's stomach flip-flopped as the pink-haired alien made her way out onto the field to the cheers of the crowd. Despite knowing that the cheers were most likely directed towards her opponent, they still brought a smile to her face. This was why she wanted to be a hero, not for the cheering, glamour, or glory, but for the happiness heroes seem to bring to others. Making her way up on stage, Mina flashed Uraraka a smile, one the buzz-cut boy happily returned. I like your horns, he complimented with a grin. Thanks, Mina said pleased, I know you're probably gonna win. But I promise I'll try my best. Can't have you thinking this alien's all looks and no fangs. Alien. Yeah, Mina said gesturing to her body, I look pretty exotic, don't you think? like an alien from outer space. I don't get it, Urashi said as he put his hands on his waist. But I would expect you to give nothing less than your best. Mina blinked. You kind of remind me of Ada. You are very strange, Urashi noted. Hey, Mina shouted as her opponent just laughed. Pouting, Mina let acid pool in her hands as Mike finally quieted down. Ready, start. It was over in an instant. Before Mina could so much as step forward, air slammed into her, knocking her backwards and over the line. Ashido is out of bounds, Midnight announced, pointing her whip at the alien slowly clambering to her feet. Urashi advances. And with that, the semi-finals draw to a close. Present Mike announced to cheers from the crowd. On screen, the already memed wheel of Nezu appeared once more, Yaoyorozu and Mina's pieces falling away to leave only Bakugo, and Urashi, Kendo's piece still in the buy box. Now let's hear a big cheer for our 3 finalists. The crowd roared their approval. Yeah, that's what I quote him talking about. YAOW. That's enough. Eraserhead cut in. Fine, even over the speakers the Adu's pout was audible. Moving on. You might be wondering just how we're going to settle this 3-way dispute for first place. The voice hero paused for dramatic effect. The answer is quite simple. A free-for-all battle royale. 3 will enter, but only 1 will leave victorious as the UA Sports Festival champion. The announcement was greeted with enthusiastic cheering from the crowd as on screen. Kendo's face moved from the buy box to join the other 2 boys on the wheel. Dearie, it's time to get up. Groaning, Itsuka rolled over, turning her back to the voice gently shaking her shoulder as she murmured drowsily. The voice sighed and an audible smack echoed through the room as Itsuka shot up in bed to sit straight up. See if I act as an alarm clock for you again, the now recognizable recovery girl huffed as she turned away. What? Get up and get moving, the youthful heroine ordered as she leaned on her cane. Extra uniforms are on a rack by the door. Grab one that fits, get changed in the restroom, then get out of my hair. Itsuka's confusion must have been obvious on her face since recovery girl sighed before grabbing one of the uniforms and throwing it at her. Put this on and get out of here. You're in the finals. I was trying to be nice by letting you get some rest before your match, but even if you don't show, I'm kicking you out of this room one way or another. I'm in the finals, Itsuka said dumbly as her brain began to catch up. Yes, although you won't be if you don't get moving. That final warning was enough to spur Itsuka into action, the Orangette simply drawing the curtains around her bed before stripping off the remnants of her uniform and throwing on the new one. Finished, she rushed to the door, throwing her half-destroyed clothing in the trash can next to it, pausing to look back at the school nurse whose attention was focused on other patients. Kendo recognized the sleeping forms of Todoroki and Yaoyorozu, the latter of whom recovery girl was currently bandaging. They'll be fine, the heroine said without looking up. Now get moving. Kendo didn't say a word, running off and letting the door swing shut behind her. Kids these days, Shuzenji huffed, always in a rush. Yo Eraser, you know what time it is. No, that's right, it's finally time for the last battle of the UA High School First Year Sports Festival. The top first year will be decided with this one match. From Hero Course Class 1A, Katsuki Bakugo. Versus. Also from Hero Course 1A, Itsuka Kendo. Versus. Our final fighter and the sole member of 1B, Inase Urashi. As the 3 fighters made their way onto the field, the crowd cheered. Cementos had been hard at work during the brief intermission, the field having changed from the rectangle it had been to a circle divided into thirds by simple white lines that also marked the border of the field. You all know the rules, Mike declared once the 3 fighters were in position, so let's not waste any more time. Ready? What's that? The confusion wasn't limited to present Mike as the audience looked on the space in the center of the field seemed to warp, curling in on itself before darkness sprouted from the center point. As cameras broadcasted the strange occurrence not just to stadium screens but televisions across the country, the dark hole grew in size before seemingly erupting, sending tendrils of dark mist whipping about before pooling back together. Yellow slanted eyes seemed to manifest in the mist staring outwards at the crowds looking on, but the more immediate attention was drawn to the hand that seemed to emerge from the mist, gripping it for assistance as a figure stepped through. Horrified gasps echoed throughout the arena accompanied by screams and vomiting as the audience looked on in horror. He was dressed simply in black pants and a similarly colored long-sleeved shirt. His skin was pale and his hair was a messy grayish-blue clumpy and uneven that hung in waves from his head. But that wasn't what horrified those looking on. Instead it was the numerous disembodied hands that he sported all over his body seemingly gripping him. 3 adorned each arm, 2 more his underarms, neck, and shoulders respectively, but the most dramatic hands hung from the figure's head, one gripping his hair while the last covered his face like a mask, leaving only crimson red eyes to shine through. He wasn't alone either, as 3 more figures emerged from the dark portal, one on either side of him and one more at his back. Once more, the masses looking on recoiled at their appearance. The one to the left of the man covered in hands was a hulking black monstrosity of muscle and scar tissue. He had a beak-like mouth adorned with jagged stone-like teeth, but his most notable feature was without doubt the exposed brain resting atop his head in which his eyes were inlaid. He sported only a pair of beige pants with metal knee pads designed to emulate skulls, his feet and torso left bare. The second figure could have been the former's brother for how closely they resembled one another. Black skin and scars decorated a muscular torso, and like his supposed sibling, an exposed brain made up a large portion of the being's head, although his seemed to consist of everything above his mouth and ears. He was seemingly blind, with no visible eyes to speak of, while also lacking his brother's beak. The final figure, standing behind the man covered in hands, could also have been related to the other two. Clad in gray trousers ripped apart just above its calves and pale green skin, it too sported an exposed brain in which 4 eyes rested. But while the intruders emerged from the misty portal, the heroes weren't just standing idly by. "Villains!" Cementos shouted, leaping from his makeshift throne to the ground below. Slamming his hands into the ground, Cementos sent a wave of cement surging towards the intruders. "Students, get back!" Midnight commanded as she tore her sleeve to release her quirk, a war fan already in each hand to help spread it about. "Annoying." An unfamiliar voice spoke up, his words broadcasting throughout the stadium thanks to the numerous microphones and cameras pointed his way. "I didn't come here to get party wiped by some low-level guards that think they're hot stuff. Boy, you two. Deal with them." With a sudden burst of speed, the 2 black-skinned villains moved. The one with the beak slammed a fist into the center of Cementos's body, sending the humanoid block of cement flying backwards where he crashed into the stadium wall, which cratered underneath him. For a moment, the man stuck to the wall, suspended from just how deep within it he was buried before he fell forward, collapsing to the ground where he lay still. As the beaked villain was dealing with Cementos, the eyeless one rushed towards Midnight. At the last moment, the heroine leapt away using her superior agility, causing the seemingly blind villain to barrel past her, crashing through and destroying the elevated referee podium the black-haired heroine had just been standing on. Swinging her fans, Midnight directed her somnambulist towards the villain's head, yet the villain didn't pause for a moment even as her quirk enshrouded him. Rushing forward once more, Midnight tried again to dodge, but as she leapt away, a black hand emerged from her mist to grab her leg. Midnight let out a scream of agony as the villain's grip tightened and she felt the bone in her lower leg snap, sending burning pain racing through her broken limb. Swinging the R-rated heroine downwards, the last thing Midnight saw was the fast-approaching ground before blissful darkness consumed her. Seconds. That was how long it took for 2 of UA's most famous teachers to be defeated. As the audience looked on horrified, the cameras panned, seemingly unable to decide where to focus, the defeated still bodies of the heroes, the young man adorned in hands who seemed to be the leader of the intruders, or the 2 monstrous beings that were now making their way back towards him. "Who are you?" Red eyes turned towards Urashi, who'd stepped forward, the normally smiling boy instead sporting an expression of utmost seriousness. "Who are we?" the masked man asked, throwing his arms wide. "We are the League of Villains. As for why we're here." The man leaned forward, his red eyes locked onto the camera broadcasting the orbs and making it appear to all those watching as if the villain was speaking solely to them. "Consider this our declaration of war." Eri trembled, her eyes locked onto the screens around the stadium showing the intruders that stood on the stage below. She clutched Yagi's shirt, curling into his while the room around her devolved into chaos as the teachers ran around, shouting orders to one another. "Eri," Yagi said, his voice quiet, a hand coming up to her back as he hugged her to him. "Are you all right?" But Eri didn't hear him, her mind focused only on one intruder in particular. The world seemed to fall away as she looked at him. She didn't recognize him, not by his exposed brain or black skin, but his beak made his allegiance clear. Her body trembled as her panic rose. Yagi was talking, but his voice could have been a million miles away, not a word of it reaching her. They were back, the shy Hasikai. They knew she was here and they were coming for her. Overhaul was coming for her. Her breaths came in rapid gasps as her mind went blank and panic consumed her. "Eri. All Might." No, he was Toshinori Yagi right now, shouted at the little girl curled into in his arms. He recognized the signs of a panic attack when he saw one, and it was clear to him that Eri was experiencing a particularly bad one. The intruders below were a non-issue, they were in the middle of the UA ground surrounded by a stadium littered with heroes even now moving to help. He wanted to go help, to make sure that Kayama and Ishiyama were alright, but the blonde knew that there were plenty of others capable of handling the situation. His concern right now was helping the little girl cradled in his arms. As he made to call out once more, he was interrupted by Eri herself, who opened her mouth and let loose a heart-wrenching scream of pure terror that deafened all other conversation in the booth. Before All Might could say a word, the horn on her head seemed to grow before his eyes as it began to glow, emitting a bright yellow light that consumed both Eri and the disguised #1 hero before All Might had a chance to react. "Hey, what's that?" Hisashi's voice cut through Shota's thoughts as he looked down at the intruders below. So far, they hadn't acted beyond incapacitating Ishiyama and Nimuri, but the sheer ease with which the 2 black-skinned individuals had done so spoke of the group's abilities. They had breached UA's security like it was nothing. No surprise if the misty figure in a suit had a warping or teleportation quirk. Them intruding on the sports festival of all things when the stands would be filled with heroes attested to either their confidence or their foolishness. But if their goal was to send a message, they'd already done it. Even now, their image was being broadcasted across not only Japan but the world, and Shota knew that no good news station would dare turn away or cut to commercial when such a major event was occurring. Even if they hadn't meant to, the villains had done something no other villain group before had. They'd shown that UA, an institution infamous for its top-of-the-line security and staff, could be breached. That light coming from the staff box. In an instant, Shota's eyes flashed up, locking onto the bright yellow light clearly shining through the windows. Hooray! Shota muttered, already leaping to his feet by the time his brain processed what he was seeing. By the time his chair fell to the ground discarded, Shota was already out of the announcer booth, rushing towards his problem child. Hey Kirigiri, Tamura spoke, his voice causing the students to tense. What's that light? I'm sorry. That light. Tamura glared towards the offending light shining down from one of the boxes above as he scratched at his throat. It's ruining our big reveal. Teleport some of the minions to deal with it. Of course, Kirigiri muttered obediently. Tamura smiled beneath father's hand. If Sensei thought he needed a rival to grow stronger, then fine. He would show not only Sensei, but his supposed rival just what he was capable of. This was his declaration of war, and no one, not these students, the heroes, his rival, or even some light would take this moment away from him. Looking down on the villain standing in the middle of the stadium, Izuku could already sense Nagant's suspicions growing at his side. No, he answered preemptively. Neither Toga or I knew this would happen, nor are either of us connected to the villains down there. We don't know who they are nor why they came here. Forgive me if I doubt you. Nagant said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, her suspicion clear. I've been held hostage this entire sports festival by a pair of villains only for another supposedly unrelated villain group to show up coincidentally at the same festival. I know how this looks, but like I said, this is truly just an unfortunate coincidence. Nagant grunted but remained silent as she turned her attention back down to the stadium below. Izuku mentally let out a sigh of relief. After his efforts to get Nagant to place even the tiniest bit of trust in him, it would have been truly unfortunate for everything to be ruined through sheer coincidence. Thankfully, it seemed that Nagant was willing to wait to pass judgment, something he was truly thankful for. There was no doubt that both UA and the HPSC would investigate this incident, not when the villains had acted so publicly. Nagant meanwhile was going to investigate him, and as a commission agent, she would no doubt be able to access the investigation reports for the festival incursion. Izuku's racing mind was interrupted by a sudden light that began to shine forth from one of the boxes above. Logically, Izuku knew he had no reason to recognize it, yet something about it seemed vaguely familiar, as if he'd somehow seen it before in a dream. Izuku wanted to turn away, but the light kept his attention, drawing him in like a moth to a flame. The longer he looked at it, the more familiar it seemed, as if it was calling to something within the depths of his soul. Unbidden, a word rose up within him until a name slipped free from his lips. Uri, Izuku spoke darkly in a voice not his own. At the sound of her little unicorn's name, Nagant whirled to look at him, her shock clear. But Izuku wasn't paying the purple-haired assassin the slightest bit of attention. Focused only on the light, his surroundings seemed to fall away as the light devoured everything around him until it was the only thing he could see, and for a brief moment, to the heroine looking on, Izuku's eyes seemed to flash gold. Itsuka swallowed, her throat dry as beads of sweat trailed their way down the side of her face. Warily, she eyed the villains who'd interrupted the day's proceedings as she slowly made her way along the edge of the field towards Urashi. The villain covered in disembodied hands stood idle, scratching his neck as he talked to the misty figure called Kirigiri, either ignorant or uncaring of the Orangette's movement. Kendo, Urashi greeted tersely when she finally reached him, his voice low, eyes never once moving from the villains. We have to get out of here, Itsuka whispered just loud enough for him to hear. There's numerous pro-heroes in the stands, not to mention the UA teachers and all the others watching from around the country. The heroes nearby are no doubt making their way here, but right now, no licensed hero can act because we're in the way, and they'd need to protect us. I know, Urashi responded curtly. As much as I'd like to help, to actively try and do anything but defend ourselves would be considered vigilantism, and with so many cameras trained on us, there'd be nothing we could do to deny it. You're right, Itsuka agreed, turquoise eyes referring to the only other student on the field, but my biggest concern is him. Urashi turned his head to glance in the direction Itsuka was looking before quickly looking back at the villains once more. Bakugo, he questioned, doubt clear in his voice. He is quite spirited, but I believe he would know better than to engage the villains. You would think so, Itsuka agreed, grimacing slightly as she recalled the standoff she'd gotten in with the explosive blonde, and Todoroki during the Protect the President exercise. But if there's one thing you should know about Bakugo, it's that. You know, a rough voice cut Itsuka off. It's rude to talk about people right in front of you as if they're not there. Turquoise eyes met crimson-red orbs that peered at the Orangette through a wall of fingers. I'm here to send a message, the leader of the villains said as he scratched his neck idly. So far, we've proven that our stealth stat is maxed out, so no place is safe from infiltration. Still, I feel like we can do more. I know. The villain perked up, straightening from his slouched posture as an idea struck him. Here in the heart of UA, surrounded by countless heroes with the world looking on, What better way to show our ability than by breaking some of UA's oh so precious eggs? Namu, the villain, raised his right arm, a single finger casually pointed towards Kendo. Kill the girl. A black blur, that was all Izuku saw. One moment the beaked villain was standing in the middle of the field next to his boss, the next there was a blur of movement racing towards her left side. Itsuka's eyes tried to track Namu, but by the time they reached the muscular monstrosity, it was already beside her, its right fist racing towards her head. The curled hand encompassed her vision, but while Itsuka was turning her head and eyes to track Namu, her left arm was already moving. Years upon years of martial arts training ingrained into her body had her lifting her arm on instinct alone in order to provide even the barest of defense against the attack. Her quirks weren't far behind either. One for all raced through her arm, highlighting the limb with orange veins, big fists following almost immediately after. Kendo's arm expanded just as Namu's fist slammed into her, but that wasn't the only thing to hit the orange-haired girl. A shout of Kendo reached Itsuka's ears at the same time a burst of wind struck her side, knocking her off balance and turning Namu's attack into nothing more than a glancing blow still powerful enough to send Itsuka spinning off the battlefield and into the grass surrounding the concrete ring. Hey, no third partying, the masked villain complained before he turned towards the other black villain besides him, Namu. At its master's command, the eyeless Namu charged forward with speed comparable to its sibling, stopping right in front of Urashi and using its momentum to launch a devastating punch. Already prepared, Urashi leapt backwards while thrusting his hands forward to launch 2 blasts of air into Namu's broad. The monster didn't even flinch, merely stepping forward to launch another attack. Seeing the students being targeted, the heroes that had been waiting at the edge of the stands to intervene began to leap over the guard railing, rushing forward to help. Geez, did no one hear what I said? The villainous mastermind muttered, seemingly unconcerned with the numerous heroes charging towards him. His tone, however, betrayed him. He sounded gleeful, as if this was exactly what he wanted. Fine, if you heroes want to get involved, allow me to give you something to deal with. Kurogiri. At its name, the warper acted, seemingly turning in on itself before vanishing. Moments later, dark portals opened up all around the stadium from which numerous villains began to pour out into the unsuspecting audience. That's when the screaming really began. Sprinting down the staff-only hallway he knew led towards the teacher's private box, Shota Aizawa didn't even attempt to slow his stride as he raced towards the sharp corner ahead of him. Keeping his momentum, Shota jumped, planting his foot against the left wall and pushing off of it. His right foot pressed down on the wall ahead of him as he turned, eyes widening beneath his mask as he caught sight of the 24 villains standing in the hallway besieging the closed door that was no doubt their target. Launching his scarf, Aizawa leapt off the wall, his knee coming up to slam into the face of a villain with some kind of carnivorous plant for a head. At the same time Aizawa pulled, dragging a villainess with gorilla arms backwards, the young woman letting out a surprised eep as she was pulled off balance and into 2 of her comrades. It took a moment for the rest of the villains to realize they were under attack, long enough for Aizawa to deliver some quick blows to the 3 knocked-over villains, knocking them out for the time being. Seeing their comrades downed, the closest villains let out a battle cry as they charged forward. One girl's stone-like hair leapt towards Eraserhead while her 2 companions raised their arms. One's fingers ended in some kind of cannon-like barrels, while the other's arms transformed into blades. The 3 grinned, no doubt thinking their numbers would see them carrying the day, but their ferocious smiles turned to confusion as Eraserhead's eyes widened underneath his mask, and their quirks deactivated. Using their confusion as an opening, Eraserhead sent his capture scarf flying, and, wrapping it around the villain to the far left, swung them into their allies, sending all 3 into the wall with a loud thud, the sound of which made it clear none of them would be getting up soon. Everyone be careful, it's Eraserhead. A 4-armed villain with rock-like skin and a black mask over his head bellowed as he pushed his way to the front. Me and some of the boys had a run-in with him a few years ago. He can deactivate your quirk by looking at you. Aizawa stood up, reeling in his weapon as the villain stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. Although you never were able to deactivate my quirk, were you? It took me a while to figure it out, but I got it eventually. Your quirk doesn't affect those with mutation quirks, does it? Charging forward, the villain laughed as he lashed out with his lower left arm with a clearly telegraphed punch Eraserhead had no trouble ducking under. The villain swung his 2 right arms around, but Aizawa leapt upwards. Gripping his capture weapon with both hands, he wrapped it around the front of the villain's throat as he flipped over his head, using his weight and momentum to pull the villain off the ground and throw him down the hallway. The mutant quirk user hit a few of his comrades as he ragdolled further away from Eraserhead before he finally stopped, lying on the floor dazed, though still conscious. For a moment the villains paused, looking at their fallen wannabe leader before turning back towards Eraserhead. The man stood there, his scarf floating around his neck like a living serpent while his black hair floated upwards, defying gravity in the process. He was right, Aizawa muttered as he stepped forward menacingly, and a few of the villains found themselves unconsciously stepping backwards. My quirk doesn't affect those with mutations, but no hero is a one-trick pony. Now either come at me or get the hell out of my way. Why is this happening? One B's chubby vice representative Nyaranjiki Shota complained as he used his quirk to intercept the sheets of papyrus launched by a villain with a body made entirely of paper. The papers exploded on impact, but the villain didn't have time to launch another attack before Jiroda Shishida smashed into him, slamming the paper-like villain into the ground. It doesn't matter, the beastly boy said as he turned looking for other potential threats. What are your orders? Vlad-sensei appointed you as class vice representative. Since we haven't heard anything from him or any of the other teachers and Urashi is indisposed, you're currently the one in charge. I don't. Geez, just say something. The battle-eager Kamakiri complained as he swung his arms, a blade cutting into his opponents, downing him with a yell. Okay, since we're right next to 1A, move that direction and try to regroup with them. What? Why? That was Monoma. Because we don't know how many of these villains there are, Shoda explained. We stand a better chance working with them than worrying about some stupid rivalry only you seem to really care about. It's not stupid. Just shut up and do what the vice said. Roared Shishida as he sent a villain flying with a swing of his arm. Fine, Monoma huffed, but I want to make it clear that we didn't need their help, they needed ours. Slowly, 1B fought their way towards their sister class. In brief moments of calm, Shoda took a moment to scan the stadium trying to figure out the situation. Urashi, Kendo, and Bakugo were still in the center of the stadium, each of the students now engaged in battle with the Namu. The heroes that had been charging forward to help were now engaged with a small horde of villains that had suddenly appeared, eager to do battle. The crowd itself was in a panic, screaming. They were on the verge of rioting as they tried to all rush at once towards the nearest exit. Some heroes were trying to assist but found themselves unable to quell the panic as they had to regularly stop and engage some villain nearby, which only caused the crowd to panic more. At the very least, the general studies, business, and support courses were gone. Their stands were also free of villains, although given their near proximity to the hero seats and the private hallways they had access to as students, it was entirely likely they'd just been able to evacuate the quickest with the least interruption. Still, that's at least one small mercy, Shoda thought. Quickly turning his attention back to the battle, it wasn't long before 1B cut their way through to their sister class. Both sides seemed to pause briefly, although they quickly regrouped and turned their attention back towards a common foe, one that quickly fell before the combined might of Japan's best and brightest. When the fighting finally ended, the two classes took a moment to recuperate before turning towards one another. I'm 1B's vice representative Nyaranjiki Shoda, the small boy introduced himself, stepping forward. Is anyone missing from your class? We're only missing 3 students, a blue-haired boy Shoda recognized as Tenya Ada said, standing at attention. Kendo and Bakugo were both meant to compete in the finals and Yaoyorozu, our vice representative, was still in the clinic getting healed by Recovery Girl. Everyone else is present and accounted for. Good, Shoda sighed, thankful about having one less thing to worry about. Okay, what about us? He asked, turning towards his class. Anybody missing from 1B? I'm here. No, present. Various students mumbled. What about Kodai? One of the girls asked, although Shoda was unable to make out who. Turning, he tried to pick out the black-haired perpetually blank-faced girl from the sea of faces. She was going to try and find the bathroom before the final started, the silver-haired Yanagi offered. Though I do not believe she made it back before they began. Should we try to find her? Someone asked hesitantly. For a moment Shoda considered it, but he quickly dismissed the idea. No, he said, continuing before any protests could be made. It's too dangerous to split up or go looking with so many villains around. The best thing we can do is to evacuate from the stadium and leave this situation to the pros to handle. But what about Kodai? She's probably fine, Shoda said reassuringly. She would have been in the hallways only accessible to staff, students, and those with special permission. I doubt any villains were able to infiltrate the area, much less have a reason to. In all likelihood, she's already left the stadium and is waiting anxiously for us outside. But you don't know that. Yeah, who put you in charge? I did, bellowed Shishida, veins throbbing. In the absence of the teachers and other representatives, Shoda is currently the one entrusted with authority. He's in charge, and if you have a problem with that, you can take it up with me. And me, Kamakiri said, unsheathing his blades threateningly. Well, I suppose he's better than nothing, Monoma sighed casually, hands behind his head, although Shoda noted how the blonde subtly brushed against Kamakiri's arm, something the human mantis acknowledged with a subtle glance and nod at the blonde. I suppose it is the Lord's will. Shiozaki muttered, hands folded. I too will assist as best as I am able. The other members of the class offered their own murmurs of support. Well, Kamakiri asked now that the majority of 1B had made their position clear, still have something to say. Ada stepped forward, face blank. 1B tensed before the blue-haired boy bowed at an approximate 90 angle. I apologize for the complaints my class has raised, Shoda-san. We will be in your care, so please do your best to reciprocate. Does that go for you guys too? Shishida asked, glasses shining. The other members of 1A voiced their agreements, although their enthusiasm differed widely. Still, that was fine, Shoda thought as the students began to make their way towards the exit. Right now he was being a hero by saving what he could. Ducking under the knife swung by a villain in a black bodysuit, Himiko frowned as she lashed out with her own weapon, cutting the man's throat with a single swing. The villain collapsed, knives dropping from his hands as they reached up to clutch the slice in his neck, leaking precious life. For a moment Himiko pondered the dying man, wondering whether it would be worth the effort needed to bend down and drink some of his herself. She quickly discarded the idea in favor of simplying her blade clean as she turned and hurried to catch up to Izuku. The green-haired boy was acting weird, which was saying something considering it was her noticing. His eyes were glazed over but focused as he made his way down an empty hallway meant solely for staff use. He was talking to himself, muttering softly, repeating the same word again and again, though it was too soft for even Himiko's amazing hearing to detect. Still disguised as the black-haired violet-eyed woman she'd pretended to be most of the day, Himiko followed her green-haired boss while studying his back. He'd begun to act weird as soon as that strange light had begun to shine from one of the boxes he'd said was reserved for those with some kind of importance. The light had seemed to capture his entire attention, like it was all he could focus on. Himiko knew Izuku had said something based on the way the hero assassin lady had turned in shock, but she hadn't been able to hear what was said over the panicked scream of the crowds that villains were attacking. Her eyes furrowed. Of course that was just her luck, wasn't it? Going on an actual date with Izuku to see Momochi perform, eating food together, the pleasant scene of splattering the stadium arena grounds as students battled each other like glorified gladiators, it was everything she'd wanted. Even the intrusion of the assassin lady Izuku called Nagant wasn't enough to ruin her wonderful day. After all, her hair was just so pretty, long and colorful like licorice when she would bind two different flavors together to create a whole new one. Her probably tasted like candy. Wait, was her hair flavored too? Himiko shook her head. No, she had to focus, don't get distracted. Where was she? Alright, the villains. Yeah, leave it to some crusty boy and his wannabe butler to ruin her date. Himiko scowled. If she got a chance, she'd stab them for their offense against her and she wouldn't even drink there. Not that she wanted to, she mentally gagged and stuck out her tongue in disgust at the thought. Just by looking at them she knew that they'd taste disgusting. Crusty would no doubt be incredibly bitter, Smoky would taste like ashes, even the three bodyguards looked like they wouldn't be any good. They all looked dead, like living corpses, and Himiko's intuition told her they'd taste the same. She liked warm, hot, crimson, and she had no intention of chugging formaldehyde from some mad scientist's escaped lab experiment. Still, she'd drink it if Izuku wanted her to. If it helped him, she'd drink as much as she could. In the chaos, they'd slipped away from Nagant. Himiko had thought Izuku would have led her to either Momochi or an exit, but instead the green-haired boy had made his way through the panicking civilians, and it had been all she could do to keep up in the chaos and stay close to him as he led her to a door labeled, staff only. The door, of course, hadn't opened at their presence since they weren't in the UA systems, but with a simple stretch of his hand and an application of overhaul, Izuku had made the door disappear. It had surprised Himiko, the boldness Izuku was displaying, she hadn't expected it. But glancing at where she'd noticed a camera was hidden, she noted that the small device was powered down. Either a villain or a hero apparently had a quirk that was disrupting some of the electrical signals. Not all of them though, since the lights were still on, but it would explain why UA's fabled security wasn't acting up to its full capabilities. Stepping up to walk beside Izuku, she frowned at the greenette's lack of a reaction to her presence. Izuku, she called. No response. Izuku, she asked, a bit louder. Nothing. It was like he didn't even know she was there. An uneasy queasiness formed in the blonde's stomach. Something was wrong, but she had no idea what. At least now that she was closer, she knew what Izuku was saying, a name he repeated over and over. Duri. An image rose in the blonde vampire's head of a trembling white-haired girl with crimson eyes and a horn on the right side of her head, clothed in a dirty cloth that could barely be called a dress, stained bandages wrapped around her arms and legs. All Himiko could do was swallow as the unease in her stomach turned from a faint queasiness to an all-out alarm, complete with flashing signs and sirens. Yet the girl could do nothing but follow after Izuku as he led her to wherever it was they were going. Aiming down the sight of her rifle, Lady Nagant exhaled as she fired, her hair bullet streaking across the stadium to strike a villain with sickle-like claws and stalk eyes that had been about to ambush an unsuspecting hero as he worked to evacuate an elderly couple. The villain went down, unconscious since her bullet had been blunted, and the hero turned. Catching sight of his would-be ambusher, the hero quickly moved to restrain the villain before looking around for whoever had helped him. Nagant herself had already moved on, the fighting around her had fallen off, the few villains nearby had been nowhere near her, so she'd been able to quickly incapacitate them. Unfortunately, their presence had been enough to drive the crowd into a panic, sending the civilians stampeding for the exit. The last Nagant had seen of her captors was a mess of green hair disappearing into the crowd, the one-armed witch that was his bodyguard following after him. Despite the setback, she at least had names to go off of: Izuku Midoriya, childhood friend of Katsuki Bakugo, and Toga for the woman. The latter wasn't much, but it was a start. As for the former, once this mess ended, she planned to do a private investigation to figure out just who this Midoriya was. She certainly wouldn't be letting her superiors know about him. If they knew that the boy had knowledge of even some of the things she'd done, then it would be in their best interest to make him disappear, and Tsutsumi had no intention to let that happen before she had a chance to talk to him again. After that she'd decide what the best course of action was. Excuses, a voice whispered in her mind. You liked talking to him. He made you feel special, didn't look at you like the monster you are. Not even Aizawa can do that. Shaking her head, refusing to spend a moment longer on the subject, Kaina craned her head looking upwards towards the teacher's box. The light she knew to have come from Eri was now gone, but it did nothing to relieve her fear. She was worried about her little unicorn, wanted to be certain she was all right. But even more concerning was the fact that Eri's quirk had activated here. It was bad enough the Safety Commission was already keeping an eye on her, but now, with the eyes of the world no doubt turned towards the attack, the odds of people investigating the light and finding out just what it was Eri could do had increased exponentially. Kaina knew that Shoda would do his best to protect her, and given Eri's sheer cuteness and Shoda's history, the staff would no doubt help him. Nezu alone would be enough to defer some, those who didn't want the principal coming forward with the countless secrets he no doubt held, but others wouldn't care. Rewind offered too many possibilities, and no matter how much they might want to, UA couldn't take on Japan, let alone the world. Not when their infamous defense had failed so spectacularly on international television. Some would recognize that it wasn't their fault, that for all their preparations, they couldn't account for every possibility, but most wouldn't care. Once things were over, the fear of the civilians right now running mindlessly for their lives would turn to anger. Anger that would need to be properly managed so it didn't target the wrong people. But all that could come later. As a scream rang out through the stadium, Kaina focused her attention on the center of the field. Her eyes analyzed the situation in a moment as her rifle came up, her free hand tearing a clump of hair from her scalp that she molded even as she stuck it inside her gun and fired. It took less than a second before the bullet was flying towards the figures below, but this wasn't a blunt bullet Lady Nagant fired. No, this was a live round, a bullet meant to kill. Itsuka screamed as her arm finally gave way, her bones snapping as the limb twisted itself in ways no arm ever should. Pain burned through her body, but even as she screamed, the beaked Namu didn't pause, merely continuing its assault. Tears leaked from teal eyes as she retreated, unable to take even a moment to recuperate. A realization struck her like lightning. She was about to die. Her life didn't flash in front of her eyes, she didn't get a feeling of peace, all she felt was the desire to live. As Namu reared back, Itsuka swung her unbroken left arm, channeling all her power into it. The limb grew in size and slammed into Namu's, the power of one for all flowing through it. But the beast was merely driven back a few feet as Kendo's arm and final hope shattered. Exhausted, the last of her energy spent, Kendo watched with dead eyes as time seemed to slow down. The Namu approached emotionlessly, its beady eyes locked onto her. Behind it, Yurashi mouthed her name in a scream. The orange jet could not hear. The Master of Air raised a hand in her direction, but before he could act, the blind Namu slammed a fist into the distracted hero in trainings, launching him down into the dirt. At the edge of her vision, she could see Bakugo, his face twisted in a savage grin as he let loose a silent explosion into the four-eyed Namu, no doubt yelling his trademark catchphrase. The green-skinned creature opened its mouth either to let out a pain scream or shriek in defiance as it seemingly absorbed the explosion falling backwards. In the momentary pause, Bakugo seemed to hear Yurashi's shout, his red eyes furrowing over towards her brows furrowing. He seemed about to head her way when his opponent sat up behind him, its four eyes staring down at Bakugo as it towered over the blonde. Its body glowed as Bakugo spun around, but he only managed to partially turn before Namu's body detonated in a massive explosion that consumed them both. Then darkness filled her vision. Craning her neck, Itsuka looked upwards at the Namu standing above her, its beaked head lowered to look at her as it pulled back its arm to end her life. Itsuka tried to move, tried to find one last desperate well of strength to draw from, but her body was spent, tired and broken. Looking up, Kendo tried to brace herself as best she could as she looked her murderer in his empty eyes. Namu stepped forward, its arm descended, a fur of movement she barely caught, and then the creature's brain exploded in a shower of black and viscera. The Namu collapsed, crumpling into a heap of muscle in front of her. Everything seemed to pause for a moment. Both heroes and villains ceased their fighting to stare in disbelief at the unmoving body. In the sudden silence, only a single voice spoke up. Hey, what did you do? Kendo's eyes moved from Namu to the villain covered in hands as he stepped towards her threateningly, eyes wide with anger. What did you do to Namu? Shigaraki, control yourself, the misty Kurogiri ordered. Shut up, Shigaraki demanded, whirling towards his ally. She did something, she cheated. It's the only way she could have beaten Namu just when he was about to finish her. The villain exhaled, visibly trying to take control of himself while Kendo struggled to her feet. It doesn't matter though, Shigaraki said, oddly upbeat. After all, it's not like whatever she did will be enough to put Namu down. What? Kendo asked softly. Shigaraki turned to look at her, but her question was answered instead by the body lying at her feet. It twitched once, twice, 3 times. Then it moved. A hand planted itself firmly on the ground which the undead creature used to raise itself back to its feet. As Kendo and everyone else watched on in horror, the flesh of Namu's broken head began to regrow. Super regeneration, Shigaraki explained, his voice full of glee. A passive skill that lets Namu heal itself no matter how much damage you inflict. Cut off a limb, break its body, Namu will come back from it as if the damage never happened. Standing upright, Namu took a step towards Kendo, who unconsciously stepped back. How do you like him? He was made specifically to go toe-to-toe with All Might himself, the anti-All Might if you will. Shigaraki laughed as Namu drew back its arm, but before either could do anything else, Namu's head was consumed in an explosion. Shigaraki's laughter died abruptly as Namu stumbled backwards. Itsuka felt an arm wrap itself around her waist as she was pulled away from the creature, and to the edge of the field. What? Shigaraki growled. Bakugo, Itsuka questioned, unable to hold back her surprise. It was indeed the Class 1 bomber, still sporting an arrogant smile. You sure think highly of your Namu, Bakugo smirked at Shigaraki, but just cause Biki over here has a regeneration quirk doesn't mean that Four Eyes does. He might be able to take my explosions and throw him back, but I know my explosions, they hurt. For all your talk, all I had to do was bomb him until he couldn't take it anymore. Indeed, with a quick turn of her head, Itsuka caught a glimpse of Four Eyes lying motionless at the edge of the field, its green skin still smoking. Shigaraki actually growled as he scratched his neck, annoying. He muttered, why's it so hard to kill some upstart brats? They're supposed to be weak cannon fodder. How are they putting up so much of a fight? It's because we're the best. Bakugo bragged, weren't you saying something about these things being strong? Four Eyes certainly didn't seem that way to me. For a moment, Shigaraki didn't respond. He stood there silently, menacingly. In that brief pause, Itsuka swore to whomever might be listening. It didn't matter what happened in the near future, should they make it out of this alive. She'd somehow find a way to strangle Bakugo even with her broken hands until she drove it into the blonde's pea-sized brain to not antagonize villains when they were under attack. Kurogiri, go deal with the airbending brat. Shigaraki ordered, eyes locked onto Bakugo. These two are mine. The sentient smoke cloud didn't say anything, merely portaling away as Shigaraki stepped forwards, his hands opening and closing at his side. Lowering himself into a crouch, the pale-haired man charged towards Bakugo, who welcomed him with an outstretched hand and an explosion. The blast didn't strike Shigaraki though, instead being tanked by Biki, who appeared in between Bakugo and his master. The monster didn't even recoil, standing still as Shigaraki leaned around him, his hand outstretched towards Bakugo's face. But Bakugo didn't just wait, his free hand was already rising, palm upturned, unleashing an explosion that filled the space between them, warding off Shigaraki's attack. The villain growled, but it wasn't him who struck but rather Namu the brute, reaching through the explosion to grasp Bakugo's right shoulder. The blonde screamed as his bones ground against one another, but he didn't stop launching explosion after explosion into Namu's black skin. Biki showed no reaction until a fist emerged from the myriad of explosions to bury itself into Bakugo's. The hand holding Bakugo's shoulder released him, allowing the blonde to collapse to the ground next to Kendo, where he promptly vomited. That's not very heroic, Shigaraki noted as he stepped around Namu to stand above the downed students. What happened to you being the best of the best? The strongest. Screw you. Bakugo wheezed. Hard pass, Shigaraki waved away the offer. You must have thought yourself so special for beating Namu. Well, let me tell you something. He was the weakest of the three. He was supposed to help hold off the heroes, but if he lost to you, then he couldn't even do that. He was useless. Useless, useless, useless. I would kill it myself, but it isn't even worth the effort. Lying on the ground, every part of his body in pain, Bakugo's head throbbed. It was like a nail was being driven into his brain from the inside, and it hurt like hell. Not now, Katsuki begged, recognizing the pounding in his head. He'd felt this before, back when he'd watched a video of the slime incident. He was regaining his memories, not with the villains attacking. But his mind didn't care. The words of the villain replayed in his mind, useless, kill, and suddenly Bakugo wasn't in the stadium, he was in a classroom dressed in his black middle school gakuren. Come on, you could at least say something back. A voice Katsuki recognized as Extra 1 said. Don't say that. Extra 2 cut in, he's pathetic, useless, what else did you expect? He can't even face reality. Katsuki was facing the classroom door, but the words caused him to pause in front of it. There was only one person they could be talking about. He opened his mouth, unsure of what to say, but his mouth continued to move on its own even as his head turned against his will, and he finally laid eyes on Midoriya. The brunette's head was down his back towards him, but Katsuki would recognize that bushy green hair anywhere. If you want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it, he said, and Bakugo's eyes widened. There were a million things he wanted to say but not that, yet he couldn't stop himself. This was only a memory. Believe you'll be born with a quirk in your next life and take a last-minute skydive off a roof. Izuku whirled, emerald eyes wide in shock, yet Katsuki couldn't say anything, his body simply moving on autopilot to raise a hand which cackled and popped with miniature explosions. Then he left Izuku there in the classroom trembling like a leaf. No. That can't be right. I didn't say that. It wasn't me. Yet no matter how much he wanted to deny his words, deep inside, Katsuki knew that they were indeed his own. Bakugo, move. Wake up, you idiot, we have to go. Red-faced, Itsuka screamed as loud as she could at the blonde as she desperately tried to drag him away from Shigaraki. Body broken, she could sympathize with Bakugo wanting to lapse into unconsciousness, but that didn't give him an excuse to nap and leave it up to her to save his ass. Deku, Bakugo ed. Wow, talk about a 180. Even with a mask, Itsuka knew that Shigaraki was smiling. For talking so big, he certainly didn't live up to my expectations. Because he lost to Namu. Itsuka growled. You said you were going to beat him, but you ordered that creature to do it instead, didn't you? What do you expect me to do? Shigaraki shrugged. Fight fair. I'm a villain, I'll take any advantage I can, and Namu here's a powerful tool indeed. In fact, I think I'll let him be the one to deal with you too. Namu. The beaked villain charged at its master's command, arm drawn back. Itsuka turned, throwing herself across Bakugo's body in a last-ditch effort to protect him. Eyes clenched tight, she braced herself waiting for the inevitable blow to come, but nothing happened. There was no burning in her. Her body ached and arms burned, but there was no new pain. After a moment, Itsuka turned and her eyes widened. A broad back, covered in a blue bodysuit, tightly stretched across the muscles underneath. Yellow hair from which two tufts emerged. It was a figure that had worldwide recognition, and while Itsuka could only look on in disbelief, Shigaraki had no trouble growling his name with hatred. All Might. The number one hero gripped Namu's fist with his left hand before delivering a powerful punch to its abdomen that sent the beast flying backwards in an uncontrolled tumble. Villains and heroes dove out of the way as the monster flew by them and slammed into the stadium wall, which shattered underneath it. Everything will be all right, All Might said as he stood tall. Across the stadium, cameras focused on the hero and the villains unconsciously stepped back. I knew he was strong, but for him to one-shot Namu. His presence, I'd heard of it before, but to experience it is something else entirely. Why? Blue eyes burning with passion tracked those around him, discerning friend from foe. Cheers rang out as civilians moments ago fleeing for fear of their lives felt reassured that no matter what happened, things would be all right. Because I am here. His body was burning, every cell crying out in unending agony as the power of Iri's quirk flowed through him. Rewind, that's what Aizawa had called it. A quirk that could be used to save so many people but came with a history marked by tragedy. A faint sound reached his ears, distant yet close. Turquoise eyes opened a crack, but saw nothing. Someone's screaming. He strained his ears, desperate to pick up anything else, yelling, shouting. Why? His memory was hazy. He was holding something close to him. Iri. Why was he holding her? Villains. That's right, villains were attacking. His grip tightened. He had to protect her. The pain continued. In the midst of his torture, an image formed in his mind. A muscular woman with black hair tied up in a ponytail, the small mole just below her bottom lip. She seemed familiar, yet he did not recognize her. Whenever he tried to remember, the pain tore through him, returning him to the present. The woman's mouth moved, but he heard nothing. He opened his own mouth, tried to tell her he couldn't hear her, that he couldn't understand, but his voice failed him. A new stab of pain struck him, different from the fire filling his veins. His heart cracked, weighed down for reasons he could not remember. The woman's eyes softened, a sympathetic smile graced her lips. She repeated what she said slowly, allowing him to read her lips. What is your dream? Another image, the same woman looking at him, her expression one of curiosity. Snowflakes drifted down from gray clouds as the two stood on the shore of a river, the shadows cast from overhead turning the water dark and glass-like. His voice, I want to make a world where everybody can smile and live together happily. I want to be a pillar that gives people hope. Their surroundings fell away, but the woman remained, her matronly smile still on her face. She spoke silently once more. People are in danger, they're panicking. They need hope, help them. I can't, he cried, mournful tears leaking from his eyes. He wanted to, his muscles strained in vain, but he was paralyzed, unable to move as Iri's quirk rewound him. The irony was not lost on him. For so long, his body had ached from years spent pushing it to the limit so he could help as many people as he could. It was only after he lost his side, had it torn away in a blow from a monstrous inhuman amalgamation of corrupted flesh, that decades of injuries truly began to take their toll. Now he could feel them vanishing, small pains fading away, tiny fires that had contributed to the inferno dying out. Yet the inferno remained, growing stronger as more of his attention was filled by it. He screamed as his side burned, screamed until he could scream no longer, yet it did nothing to help him. Then all at once, it stopped. The light that had blinded him faded away as a small weight slumped against his broad. He blinked as his eyes adjusted, the room quickly coming back into focus. His fellow faculty members were spread out over the room well away from him and young Iri, likely in an effort to avoid being affected by her quirk. Speaking of Iri, he looked down. She was asleep, her tiny rising and falling softly as she snored quietly, a soft hue that reminded him of a baby kitten. It seems that the activation and usage of her quirk has left Miss Iri quite exhausted, an almost cheery voice noted. Principal, All Might questioned, his voice hoarse. Weakly, he turned his head to find himself face to face with a dog-mouse bear creature standing on the seat next to him. And Aizawa, the being said, gesturing to the open doorway of the private box where the shaggy-haired teacher stood leaning against the doorframe, using it to support himself. His costume was torn in several places and he was breathing heavily. Behind him, All Might could just barely make out several forms lying limp in the hallway. You have him to thank for stopping Iri's quirk when he did. If things had continued as they had, well, best not to think about it. Nezu chirped cheerfully. How are you feeling, All Might? The hero took a moment to mentally examine his body. I feel ... good. he admitted, the surprise clear in his voice. In fact, I feel better than I have in years. That's no surprise, Nezu squeaked, smiling eerily. After all, it seems you have physically regressed nearly 2 decades in the brief time you were affected by Misery's quirk. Time seemed to freeze around him. What? All Might choked out. Nezu responded with a mere gesture of his paw. Taking the principal's que, All Might looked down, taking in for the first time that Eri had managed to comfortably collapse against his now broad, that his side hadn't sent pain rippling through him when he moved, twisting in his seat even the slightest bit. But I'm not in my muscular form. All Might whispered, unable to hold in his surprise. Of course not, you no longer have a muscular form. You were rewound before your debilitating injury was inflicted upon you. You're as close to your physical prime as you can reasonably get. But, we'll have time to talk later, Nezu said, holding up a paw to stop All Might before he could ask any more questions. As fascinating as this is, our current situation is not conducive to long conversations. We are under attack, the people need reassurance, they need you. All Might took a deep breath, his shoulders set as he stood up, holding young Eri close to him. The girl didn't awaken as he handed her to Aizawa before making his way to the windows, looking out over the stadium below. Looking down, he could see his students, miniature figures at this height, trying their best to face threats they had no reason to confront. A swipe of his hand tore his suit from his body, revealing his hero costume underneath, the blonde not having changed out of it after his talk with Endeavor. The muscular behemoth crouched, bending his knees before leaping through the glass panel, which shattered, blowing outwards after him as he descended, dropping several stories in seconds to land in the stadium below, kicking up a cloud of dust as he landed. You know, Snipe said in the sudden silence he left behind with his departure, I think that's the first time I've ever seen him without that signature smile of his. Yui Kodia, Class 1B's resident Kudir, was shaking. Her body trembled, tears leaked from her eyes as she sobbed silently. She tried for the umpteenth time to move, to shimmy and shake, to do anything but stand there in the hallway frozen in place, but she could do nothing. She could blink and move her eyes. She could breathe through her nose, her lungs in turn expanding and contracting as she inhaled and exhaled. She could swallow, but when she tried to do anything else, tried to move her jaw to speak, walk with her legs, or lash out with her arms, her body remained still. At most she could vibrate in place, her limbs softly shaking as she pushed her body to move, to do anything other than stand there and let. What's wrong? A voice hissed in her ear, dripping with sinister glee. An arm draped itself around her neck, its skin rough and pimply, leaving her feeling dirty as her captor leaned in close, practically pressing his skull-shaped mask against her face. Are you trying to move? Don't tell me you're having trouble. Yui cursed herself for letting her guard down, for thinking this monster could have been a hero. She knew it was excusable. Heading back to her seat from the restroom, the man had approached her saying he'd been impressed by her performance. In these back hallways open only to UA students, staff, and those with special permission, she'd thought nothing of his presence. He'd held out his hand introducing himself as Tesla, and when she'd gone to shake it, he'd acted. A shock raced through her system when their hands touched and she'd found herself immobilized, frozen, still standing. He hadn't stopped touching her since. He explored her body, his bare hands slowly trailing down her sides, causing her to shiver in disgust. When he reached her hips, he squeezed them before pulling a hand back to slap her rear. Yui couldn't stop herself from yelping, the villain immediately pouncing on her response. Did you like that? He asked smugly. Yui merely glared at him balefully. The villain laughed. Don't give me that look, he snorted, amusement clear. It's not my fault you assumed I was a good guy. He pulled a hand back, and as she watched, yellow lightning danced in the air between his fingers. Rank villain, Tesla. Quirk, electric charge. An electric type, Tesla can harvest and manipulate electrical currents. An interesting thing about the human body that not a lot of people think about is that it runs on electricity. Every movement, from the simple act of breathing to the slightest twitch of your finger, happens because of an electrical signal your brain emits. It's still a work in progress, but so long as I keep a hand on somebody, I can keep those signals from going through. Sure, the smaller, non-conscious stuff gets through, which is why you're currently able to breathe and I can't keep your body from twitching. But the bigger actions, like the act of punching me, Yui just knew the villain was smiling behind his mask, those I can keep in check all day. He laughed again. Who would have thought infiltrating UA would be such a breeze? I mean, seriously, they talk so big about their security, yet here I was able to walk straight through the secure door with a wave of my hand. They'll catch you, Yui spoke for the first time, her voice surprisingly calm considering the situation she found herself in. I highly doubt that, Tesla said darkly. I have no doubt that if I was here by myself I'd already have been caught. But the thing is, he leaned in close, I'm not here by myself. I'm part of the League of Villains, and right now all my compatriots are out there in the stands running wild amongst the civilians. The heroes are going to have their work cut out for them, so I doubt they'll bother coming here to the section of the stadium reserved for those UAS approved. That means you're here all alone with me, and I have all the time in the world. Yui felt her confidence shatter. If what he was saying was true, no one was coming for her. Sure, her classmates knew she'd gone to the bathroom, but as Tesla said, these hallways were supposedly secure, protected by UA's infamous security system. There was no reason for them to believe she was in danger. She was alone. Yui was brought back to reality as Tesla grabbed her and pushed her backwards. Her paralyzed legs kept her from moving and she eeped as she fell, stars dotting her vision when her head hit the wall. Tesla straddled her. One of his hands came up to roughly grab her while the other grabbed the top of her uniform. He pulled on it roughly, but the fabric of the sports festival uniform was designed to handle students far stronger than him without breaking. Growling at the inconvenience, Tesla took his hand from her to grab the top zipper, slowly lowering it, savoring the moment. A black workout sports bra came into view, but was quickly torn away, revealing the pale flesh of Yui's bare ass. Pink nipples hardened in the cold air as Tesla threw the remnants of the bra to the side and proceeded to grope her. Yui shivered as his hands roughly dug into her flesh. This was the dark side of heroics, one rarely touched upon in the news or spoken about out loud, but one that everybody knew about even if they preferred not to think about it. Heroes didn't always win, sometimes they lost, and when that happened, they didn't always walk away. Losing a fight as a hero left you in the villain's power, your fate tied to their whims. You could get killed, tortured, sold, vanish off the face of the earth and into the shady underground never to be heard from again. It was the truth, cold and brutal as it could be, and while they all had to sign a waiver for the heroics course saying they understood what could happen, it wasn't something any of them felt they would have to worry about for some time. UA was 3 years, and as they'd been told in orientation, each was designed with a particular focus. First year was all about training, growing stronger, both physically and with their quirk, honing it, learning just what their limits were, and pushing beyond them to go plus ultra. Second year would be spent training to get their provisional license and once they got them, interning with heroes in a support capacity. Third year would be about specialization and networking, choosing what area of heroics they wanted to focus on and then doubling down upon it. This was the year students applied for psychic positions at an agency, or set about planning to start their own. As a heroic student, Yui knew what it was she was getting herself into, what she was risking by choosing this lifestyle. Death, injuries, capture, even the situation she found herself in wasn't discarded as a possibility. But that was the thing, wasn't it? It's a possibility, a statistic you only see or hear about until it happens to you, then it becomes all too real. Having had his fill playing with her memories, Tesla hooked a hand in Yui's waistband, and with an impatient heave pulled her pants and underwear down to her knees. Exposed, bare to the world, Yui shivered as the villain stared down at her, taking in the black patch of hair above a narrow slit. "I'm going to have fun with you," Tesla said after a moment, his voice a terrible promise of things to come. "I'm going to play with you until I get tired, then I'm going to leave you here for them to find. I can see it now, Yui. Attacked. Hero student found raped and murdered in secure hallway. The press will have a field day. I doubt even Yui can recover from a blow like that, but then again, I guess that's not going to be your problem, is it?" Yui shivered as Tesla reached for her, one hand going back towards her while the other slid lower. Footsteps sounded in the distance, growing steadily closer as Tesla leaned in close, breathing heavily from clear arousal until it hit them both at the same time. Footsteps. Someone was coming. With a growl, Tesla turned, still crouched over Yui, a hand keeping her pinned down. His hold on her did weaken though, allowing the girl to turn her head and watch as a green-haired boy slowly walked into view, a black-haired violet-eyed one-armed woman flanking him protectively. Yui's hopes raised ever so briefly fell. The boy was clothed not in a UA sports uniform or hero costume but in a regular pair of black pants and a faded blue t-shirt. No civilian could get back here, which meant this newcomer had to be another villain, come to have his way with her. "Who are you?" Tesla asked, and Yui felt an expression of surprise flash across her normally blank face. He didn't know him. The boy didn't respond, merely walking forward, his steps steady. He appeared to be mumbling to himself, and while the woman cast a glance at them, she seemed more focused on the boy she was following. "Oi, don't ignore me," Tesla yelled as he stood up. Yui immediately went to move, but a yellow flash had her collapsing back against the wall groaning in pain. The boy kept walking, ignoring the masked villain entirely until the man moved to stand in the middle of the hallway, blocking his way. The one-armed woman tensed, the F of her wrist, and Yui's eyes widened as a knife suddenly appeared in her hand. However, before she could act, the boy spoke and all eyes turned to him. "Move." A single word spoken softly, but with such authority that Yui knew some of her weaker-willed classmates would have obeyed immediately. For a moment Tesla seemed to want to obey, but with a shake of his head, the desire seemed to disappear. "Are you telling me what to do?" The skull-masked villain roared, hands cackling with electricity. "I don't care who you are, keep talking and I'll fuck." A sweep of the boy's hand, the sound of something bursting, and liquid crimson splattered across Yui's face. Yui blinked, her brain racing to catch up to what she'd just seen. The boy had moved, his hand swatting Tesla like he was trying to ward off a bug. The man had seemed to swell, eyes bulging in fear and panic, then his upper body burst, splattering on everything around him. For a moment, Tesla's lower body had remained upright before it collapsed limply to the ground. 3 pairs of eyes looked on, 2 in shock and 1 uncaringly. The boy was the first to speak. "Disgusting," he said, simply. Gripping his shirt, he raised it to his face to wipe away a splatter of on his cheek, briefly revealing a toned stomach underneath. Then he simply resumed his walk. Between the girls, his companion was the first to recover. Izuku, there's still some left, let me get it. The woman said, blushing wildly as she rushed to follow her companion, leaving Yui alone and exposed with the half corpse of her would-be rapist. For a moment, the girl continued to lean against the wall, just taking everything in before she slowly came back to herself. Reaching down, she pulled up her pants before zipping up her top, not bothering to even try and improvise something with the broken remnant of her bra. Pushing herself up shakily to her feet, Yui cast a glance down the hallway. The two strangers had vanished down, but they were already out of sight. Turning her attention to Tesla's corpse, the corners of Yui's mouth twitched in what those who knew her would call a wild grin, while the faintest dusting of red crossed her cheeks. He saved me, Yui said softly as she eyed the work of her savior. Cheers rang through the stadium as All Might stood tall, his muscular back seemingly shouldering the faith, trust, and expectations of all those who believed in him. It was a heavy burden, one that would have unnerved if not outright broken others, but it was a weight All Might had endured time and time again. All Might, Itsuka said softly, tears in her eyes. Young Kendo, I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner, that you had to face this threat on your own without help. I'm so proud of you, but from here on out, don't worry, you can leave everything to me. Itsuka smiled as her mentor stood up, standing protectively over her and Bakugo. He was here now, everything would be all right. Finally, the orange jet gave into her exhaustion and let unconsciousness overcome her, collapsing limply against Bakugo's body. All Might smiled down at his successor. True, she was still in the middle of a battlefield, but now that he was here, he could draw the villain's attention away from her. His smile fell as he turned to look towards the villains in question, anger blazing. To come here, to threaten the lives of my students, to endanger the people who wanted to come and support them. I will only say this once, surrender, stand down and allow yourselves to be arrested. Or what? A single voice called out from the horde of villains. All Might turned his head, or I'll show you the strength of the man who has held the title of the #1 hero for decades, and has retained it ever since it was given to him. His voice didn't waver, it was as if he was simply stating a fact, and everyone knew All Might never lied. The weight of his threat, his promise brought an imposing silence to the stadium for a moment, silence broken by the sound of clapping. Careful, with a speech like that, one might mistake you for a villain, All Might, Shigaraki hissed balefully. The only villain here is you and the thugs you brought. I already defeated your strongest fighter, now surrender. No, and I wouldn't count Namu out of the fight just yet. He's still got some secrets left to show you. As if in response, a roar echoed from where Namu had slammed into the stands. Ah, and it looks like he's ready for round 2. Before All Might could say anything else, the muscular black body of Namu emerged from the dust sent airborne from his impact with the stadium wall. As the beast rushed forward, All Might charged to meet him, the two meeting with an impact that sent wind rushing through the stadium, and served as the starting signal for the other heroes and villains to resume their ongoing battle. To anyone watching, the back and forth between All Might and Namu would have been a blur, with only those used to moving at high speed being able to follow their movements. Numerous punches were launched, each second landing before being pulled back to attack once more. It was All Might though who emerged with the advantage. Ducking under a wild right swing, the blonde's fist slammed into Namu's, sending the beast hurling backwards. This time the hero followed though, rushing after him and grabbing Namu's face mid-tumble before slamming it into the ground, their momentum carrying them for several meters as All Might used Namu's head to carve a furrow into the dirt. But All Might didn't stop there. When their momentum began to die down, he pulled Namu upright, whirling around before tossing him back into the same crater Namu had made when All Might first threw him. Namu had only a second to begin pulling himself out before All Might slammed into him with a raised elbow, sending the pair backwards and out of view. For a few seconds, the only thing that could be made out was the impact of fists on flesh before a shape was sent hurling back out. It's All Might, somebody screamed unnecessarily, and indeed it was. The #1 hero turned midair to land on his feet, looking up to see Namu charging for him. Their fistfight resumed as Shigaraki looked on with his misty companion, laughing and cheering on his monstrous servant. How's it feel, All Might? The crazed villain asked, to fight against the being made specifically to defeat you. His quirk, shock absorption, lets him tank your blows so no matter how much you hit him, your blows won't have any effect. You might as well give up and die already. Never. All Might roared as he launched a particularly strong blow that sent Namu stumbling back. So what if Namu here was made to defeat me? All that means is that I need to become even stronger. Fine, Shigaraki growled, then why don't you handle his brothers as well? What? Before All Might could move, a portal opened behind the blonde hero and even as he whirled to face it, instinct screaming, a pink web flew from the dark hole in space wrapping around All Might to hold him. It was only able to hold him for a few seconds, but that was enough time for another portal to open up at All Might's side. Those looking on screamed in horror, hands flying to their mouths as All Might stood there, dripping down to pool at his feet as the eyeless Namu wrapped itself around All Might, sharpened scales jutting from its body, and impaling the hero. It was like he was dreaming, able to do nothing but watch through his own eyes as his body acted. He was still there controlling himself, but it was subconscious. Much like breathing, he wasn't thinking about moving, he just was. He wondered why, but his thoughts were muddled, cloudy. It was the light, ever since he'd seen it, he'd been out of it. He needed Uri. Had to find her. Izuku, where are we going? Ah, that's right, Himiko was there. Maybe she knew where Uri was. Uri. Yes, I know you're looking for Uri, but why? Need her. But why? He opened his mouth, but paused before he could say anything. Why did he need her? What could a little girl offer him? Ignore her, a voice whispered in his head. Focus on Uri. Find her. Why? Izuku slurred. Because I need her, the voice hissed. We need her. She's the key, the solution to everything. We can't progress without her. That doesn't make sense, Izuku scowled as he tried to link one thought with another. Why can't I progress without her? She's a little girl, she's not essential. We need her quirk. The voice howled, her body, her contained the key to curing the disease that infects us all. You were beautiful once, perfect even, but now look at you. You're sick, tainted, cursed with the same disease that's inflicting all of humanity. But we can cure it, reverse what happened to us. All you need to do is find her. No, Izuku stumbled as his head pounded. It felt like his brain was being torn open from the inside, but his body was reacting as he wanted it to. He could feel himself taking control once again. The voice screamed in anger, trying to fight him for the mental controls to his body, but Izuku wasn't going to give in. He shoved the voice back, pushing it down to the recesses of his mind, but as it faded away, Izuku managed to get a glimpse of his hitchhiking passenger. The bare face of Kaichisaki glared at him, yellow eyes burning with hatred as the man disappeared into the darkness, just another shadow in a realm full of them. Izuku remained still, his eyes locked onto where the young Yakuza boss had disappeared, mind racing, filled with questions. A soft touch on his shoulder brought Izuku back to reality. He leapt back, hands raised as he activated Overhaul, but stopped when he found himself looking into the concerned violet eyes of Himiko's disguise. Izuku, the disguised vampire asked, her concern clear. Yeah, Himiko, it's me, Izuku said as he let his arms fall to his side. Come on, let's get out of here. My head is killing me and I'm not in the mood to be questioned over how we found our way into a secure area. Okay, Izuku, the Ravenet said, following her boss to the nearest exit. Opening it, the two slipped out into the crowd, quickly disappearing amongst the masses. What happened, All Might? Shigaraki questioned gleefully as pulled at the hero's feet. Didn't you say you were going to show me the strength of the #1 hero? That you were going to surpass your limits? Well, I'm waiting, and I have to say so far, I've been very underwhelmed. You call this an injury? All Might said softly, yet his voice was still powerful enough to reach the entire stadium. Huh. I said, All Might spoke as he slowly raised his arms, tongue still wrapped around them, to grab the eyeless Namu's shoulders, uncaring of the scales that cut into his hands at the action. You call this an injury? The eyeless Namu growled, but said growls became shrieks as All Might tightened his grip on the being's shoulders. The scales underneath his hands began to groan before cracking as All Might looked up, blue eyes shining. This is an injury, he claimed before pushing down. The eyeless Namu shrieked as its scales gave out, shattering irreparably. A second later, its shriek grew more shrill as its arms were forced out of their sockets. That's it? Shigaraki asked unimpressed, his tone bordering on bored. Here I was hoping for some grand display, yet all you do is dislocate his shoulders. He lowered his head, shaking it like All Might was a child that needed scolded. You act like you've accomplished something, like you've won, yet you haven't done anything. What? The Namu at his feet screamed in answer, standing as its arms slowly forced themselves back into place. The beak Namu behind All Might strode forward to stand behind the hero while four eyes emerged from Kurogiri's portal, his tongue still bleeding from the cuts inflicted on it by its sibling scales. Shock absorption, scale mill, tongue web. Shigaraki listed, pointing at each Namu as he named their respective quirks. But that's not all. Super regeneration, strength enhancer. He pointed at the black-skinned Nomus. Absorption and release, muscular augmentation. Four eyes. Each Namu here has multiple quirks and is capable of going toe-to-toe with some of the top heroes. You might be strong, All Might, but you aren't immortal. You're human just like everyone else, you bleed, and when I kill you here in front of the world, everybody will know that no matter how great you are, heroes eventually fall. You're wrong. Huh. I'm not going to fall. Not here, not ever. I am All Might, the #1 hero. Upon my back, I carry the hopes and dreams of all of Japan. I am the symbol of peace, and I will never fall, not to villains like you. Shigaraki growled, his eyes burning with hatred. Then you can die, you old geezer. Die knowing that everything you've done, all you've worked to build, I'll tear it down. This is my era now, you're nothing but a remnant of the past that should know when it's time to take his leave. Namu, the brain-exhibiting beasts growled as they charged forward. Screams rang out through the stadium, cries of All Might, fueled with hope and faith as the blonde stood tall and clenched his fists. Eyeless reached him first, fresh scales erupting from its body to provide a protective layer of armor that shattered immediately when All Might's fist buried itself in the Namu's, sending it reeling. Four Eyes' tongue lashed out at the blonde, a web of muscles swelled and strengthened by muscular augmentation. All Might's form blurred as he dodged the attack and grabbed the tongue just before it split. Four Eyes widened as the pro used the tongue to swing the green-skinned Namu about before slamming it into Beaky. Beaky's momentum briefly halted. The beast roared as All Might turned, using Four Eyes' tongue. He threw his captive over his shoulder, burying him into the ground. Four Eyes let out one last cry before going limp. All Might turned to face his anti-symbol, the beaked Namu letting out a wild scream as it charged its target. An exchange of blows followed that sent wind billowing throughout the stadium. Oi, 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 I just told you Namu's quirk is shock absorption. Do you really think that you can overcome it by punching him harder? Shigaraki questioned. His quirk might be shock absorption, All Might said, answering the question despite the battle he was waging. But it's not shock nullification. That must mean there's a limit to it then. 2, 4, 6, 9, 13, 17, 2 dozen. Blow after blow landed on Namu's and slowly the Namu began to give ground. It lashed out, claws arching for the hero's head, but they cut only air. All Might roared as he stepped forward, fist drawn back flew and the beast was sent tumbling. Just like earlier, All Might followed, grabbing its arm. He swung the beast around before sending it flying towards the sky. The ground cratered under All Might as he crouched before leaping upwards, sending dust flying. Namu turned trying to orient itself before its eyes found All Might. Its beak opened as it screeched, turning towards the hero. It launched one final attack that All Might dodged. Begone. Namu's skin rippled, caving in as All Might's fist buried itself in the creature's stomach before it was sent hurling away into the distance. No. He was supposed to be weak, a relic of what he once was. Shigaraki's fingers tore white strips from his neck as he scratched himself, eyes cast skywards. How can he still be this strong? It's unfair. A shape descended from the heavens, slamming into the ground in front of him. The sudden impact cut off the villainous youth's rant, leaving him staring with hatred at All Might as the hero emerged from the dust his landing had kicked up. You, he growled. Me. All Might agreed, standing tall. He was panting, sweat dotted his brow, and his suit and skin were littered with cuts and from where Eyeless had grappled him. I'll only say this one more time. Surrender. Teeth ground together hard enough to crack. No, Shigaraki hissed, I'll never surrender, not to you. Never to you. Eyes darted around and All Might could only look on with mounting confusion as Shigaraki seemed to smile beneath the hand that covered his face. You're going to let me go. No, I'm not. You are. Not willingly, but I'm going to get away because of you, because of your desire to save others. I will leave here a free man and I will make you regret it. You may be the #1 hero, All Might, but I will make people curse your name. When I'm done with you, everybody in this country, no, around the world, will wish with all their might that you never became a hero. The people you've saved will wish you'd left them to die because you saving them will be the worst thing that ever happened to them. You're going to prison. No, I am not. After all, Shigaraki tilted his head to the side. I never did fulfill my promise of breaking so precious eggs. Namu, kill the girl. All Might whirled, eyes wide as he saw the eyeless Namu standing unevenly over the unconscious forms of Itsuka and Bakugo. Scales erupted from its arm as it screamed, preparing to bring the limb down and crush the two students underneath. No, All Might shouted, kicking off from the ground with a burst of speed as he flew towards his successor. Behind him, at the edge of his vision, he could make out Shigaraki disappearing into a portal laughing madly, but the man-child was all but forgotten. Despair was overcoming him. He was too tired, too exhausted from the effect of Ares' quirk and his battle with the Namu. He might be far stronger than he was only an hour ago, but he wasn't in his prime, even if he was closer to it. But that didn't matter right now. He was too slow, too far away. He wasn't going to make it. And then Namu cried out, stumbling backwards as a blast of fire severed its arm from its body. It screeched but hands were already wrapping around its head, a wave of flames burning the Namu stronger and faster than super regeneration could heal. Then they let go, allowing Eyeless to collapse first to its knees, then onto its back. All Might slid to a stop as Kendo's savior turned to him with a grunt. All Might. Endeavor. The halls of the stadium are secure. I was in them when the attack began, which is why I wasn't out here earlier. Thank you. The #2 hero grunted in response. Turning, the top two heroes turned their gaze out towards the field. The heroes' numbers had carried the day and the few pockets of fighting quickly stopped when it became clear that both All Might and Endeavor were on the scene. As things died down, All Might watched as Itsuka, Bakugo, and Urashi were loaded onto stretchers and carted off, leaving him alone with his thoughts. His students, his successor, were children. They were training to be heroes, but they'd barely even begun to learn before they'd had to experience firsthand what it was they would eventually have to deal with. And what about the other students? Those who were here for an education, to be engineers, and business managers. Why should they have to be endangered, threatened in a school where they were supposed to be safe? UA would need to update its security, and even then, All Might had no doubt repercussions would follow. There would be backlash from the public, from the parents, everybody would have something to say. D always been a target, all hero schools were, but All Might couldn't help but feel he'd only painted a bigger one with his presence. The commission might try something, if not other villains could easily see this as being weakened and decide to try their luck. The League's attack would embolden others to step out from the shadows. Their numbers would only grow with their success, driving their recruitment up and inspiring others to follow them. As for the Namu, turning, All Might could only eye the corpse of Eyeless, where it lay covered by a tarp. He'd already received the news that the beaked Namu had been found and captured, the creature not even resisting arrest. He'd watched as 4 eyes had been carted away. All 3 of these creatures, these Namu, had multiple quirks. His side, once torn away, ached, and he unconsciously raised a hand to cover it. No, he was gone, dead. All Might had confirmed it himself. He'd smashed the devil's head in and seen firsthand the body go limp. Torino and Sasaki had both watched as the corpse had been burnt before taking a portion of the ashes and hiding them, swearing never to reveal to anyone including each other what they'd done with them. Was it paranoid? Yes, to the extreme, but with an evil like that, there was no other option. He was gone, these Namu had to be the product of something else. But that was for later. Turning, All Might felt his stomach drop and heart grow heavy as he turned to an area covered in tarps. Beneath them, he could make out the rough shape of the bodies that lay underneath. Some had been heroes, other villains, but in death they all lay still. Swallowing, All Might forced himself to turn away and looked up at the sky. The day, which had started sunny and bright, was now overcast. It wasn't raining yet, but a storm was no doubt coming. All Might could feel it in the way the wind was blowing, smell it in the air. His fist clenched at his side. He might not know what was ahead, that was Sasaki's quirk not his, but he would be ready for it when it came. He could feel One for All slipping away, slowly leaving him for Itsuka, but his time was not yet past. Ares' quirk had given him a boost, a second chance he would not waste. A storm might be coming, but he was All Might, the symbol of peace and #1 hero, he would be here to meet it.